know that was a thing. There's 960 different positions in total. This I know. And I've also learned that the king has to stand in between the rooks or something. I tried
Mm-hmm.
making it like a practice position earlier today, and it turns out I did it wrong because I put both the rooks on the same side of the king. And you need to have a dark squared bishop and a light squared bishop. So there are some restrictions on how the pieces are placed. And apparently, after all of these restrictions, it's 960.
It's crazy. It's always crazy to me that after all the restrictions, there's still 960 possible positions. As you mentioned, they are all numbered. So this is position number 267. And what do we have? What is sort of the first thing that catches your eye about the starting position?
I don't know. I've tried playing some chess 960 online, Fiona, and I really really struggle with it. To me, I feel like you should just try and get your pawns into the center, but it's definitely not that easy. I guess this bishops in the corner, you can
Hmm.
say those are pretty bad, but at the same time, if you move your pawn one step forward, those bishops are already fianchettoed and they're already pointing down on the opponent's king. I also guess actually the king's positionings are really really weird. Because for the king to castle king side,
There's a lot
that
of pieces to get out.
yeah, that's just a massive amount.
Yeah.
But at the same time, because the left rook is on the edge here, that means in order for you to kind of develop your pieces sensibly and then get your bishop out somehow and then castle queenside like this, it leaves a lot of open space.
Hmm.
And maybe that means the king is not going to be that well defended, especially considering the bishop pointing down here. I have a philosophy actually. I have a philosophy about kind of that I tried to utilize in my chess 960 games,
Hmm.
and that is that I think that the knights are really good when standing behind a pawn.
So you would be tempted to play e4 at some point to bring the knight
Well,
to
I would play
e3.
maybe like f4 and
Hmm.
knight f3 to create that knight and pawn working together because then they're pointing towards the it's I think it's a pretty good coordination of the pieces. And then
You
you can
also open up the rook at the same time in a sense from f1.
yeah, for this one, yeah. And then maybe do something similar on this side.
Hmm.
But the problem is your opponent is going to do something and you have to react to that. And even the thing about chess 960, even when your opponent just copies your plans, it's really really difficult to prove any kind of advantage.
You mentioned the bishop on h1, on h8. Could we do something wonky? Open up that bishop and then just push the a pawn?
Well, the thing is, I mean, if you could get the a pawn pushing all the way, I guess that would be very nice. But what if the guy just blocks?
Mhm. And
I
can we
don't
not
know.
somehow target the a5 pawn first now if I go d3 and bishop d2, something like that?
Yeah, I
Okay.
guess. It's an interesting idea. I guess the knight can come and defend. Yeah, I don't know. Chess is just very
It's a
difficult.
bit greedy, maybe.
Oh yeah, no, you cannot capture. You cannot give away
No, that's
your
why
bishop.
I didn't think to do, but the whole approach was based on, yeah. But
Yeah,
okay,
no,
if it's
maybe it's good. Maybe it's good because having this pawn here is gonna make it more difficult for black to castle.
mhm.
I don't know. What I realized looking at these chess 960 games and positions is just that we are very dependent on
Yeah.
patterns. Like, we're so lost when we lose our kind of like normal coordination of the pieces.
Mhm.
It makes chess more than double as much, more than double difficulty.
Yeah, and we see the players there still discussing. We see Wesley actually has joined the group of Sam and Ray, and we see Jeffery as well in the background. And does it look so? The players, am I correct in saying I've somehow been lost in the delay? There is a 15-minute delay, right? So they
Yeah,
should be starting, and we should be getting moves any moment now.
yeah.
For those of you who are wondering what the wall in my background is, I know it looks interesting. I'm just in a rented apartment, so I'm not quite sure what it is, but yeah, it's an interesting wall for sure. Um, okay. It's a shame that we didn't see the camera on that we didn't pay close attention or that we didn't see what the players were analyzing. Oh, there we actually see. Well, the pawn is definitely on f4, g3, the pawn on d3, and knights on d2 and d3. Who is that analyzing? Is that Linier? No, wait, Linier? Yeah, that is Linier, and who else? Anyway, the boards have been reset. It looks like the players are going to start quite soon. For those of you, is the footage on delay? I didn't think so, but now I'm not sure. Apparently, players are getting. I think we're getting moves.
Yeah, so it seems like Hikaru started out pushing his pawn to a dark square. So Hikaru played pawn to d4, and here Ray played pawn to g6, creating an immediate attack on that pawn, and Hikaru simply defends. And it turns out, I guess, after all that discussion we had, Fiona,
Mhm.
uh, Hikaru just went with a simple, let's put a pawn in the center and have the knight defend it. Let's not overthink this.
Mhm. Yeah, so none of that my nonsense of ram the ape pawn up the board. But also interesting that he didn't go for this f4 idea, which I'm not sure now who it was, but some of the players who were analyzing definitely had a pawn on f4. I wouldn't be surprised if some of the other games had started with f4, but Ray now thinking, which is interesting, but he's just responded with advancing his d pawn forward one square, so d6, his chosen move. So d6 opening up, although we've lost it, let's wait for a second just so that we get the live board back. And Hikaru is in the tank now. After we see that Ray has made the move d6, and Hikaru is the first one to think. There's a few things I guess he can do. I think Hikaru could grab more space in the center here, and we'll bring back the live board as well as the analysis board in just a second now. as
Yeah,
we
no,
see that.
I'm messing up a little bit.
No, don't worry. I think it's always tricky, these broadcasting these chess 960 events where first we get the position and then we
Yeah.
start playing. It's all a bit chaotic, but we're almost there now, and they're still only on move 3, so we haven't missed much.
Yeah, and that's kind of the benefit, right? That they do need to spend quite a lot of time thinking about the beginning of the move, the beginning of the game, in a completely different way than they do in um, in um, in like from the normal starting position.
Hmm.
Okay, so pawn to g6, we saw this, the bishop attacking the pawn at the center. Hikaru defended, and now Ray tries to build up his pawns in the center, but he first needed to have this support pawn to then push up afterwards. Very often in, I don't know what to call it, normal chess, the way you punish this kind of play is by pushing forward and giving yourself a space advantage, being more aggressive with the pawns than your opponent. But here I think Hikaru just couldn't allow himself to do that because
Hmm.
black had immediately a very nice move to start putting pressure on white's center. So Hikaru instead chose to make the trade, and then after the recapture, now Hikaru goes for the fianchetto, but he goes for the fianchetto in kind of an area I was not anticipating. I thought he was going to focus very much on this bishop in the corner, trying to get that bishop into play. But instead, he's kind of buried this bishop. Like, look at this. Look at all these pieces he put in front of the bishop. This guy is not getting into play anytime soon. However, he is going to get his bishop on the other side out. Honestly, he might not even do the classical fianchetto. He might go even further to attack the black rook on f8. And then when he moves his knight out and castles, now that the d file is opened, when white castles, it's going to prevent black from castling in return. So Hikaru might massively benefit from having opened in the middle, because now castling will potentially prevent black from castling.
I thought I knew the rules, but now you have me confused. Are you sure that black would be stopped from castling? I mean, can the king, if there is a rook on
Oh,
d1, are you
oh, you're
sure?
right. You're
I think that
right.
black can still castle.
Black can still castle. It's the king that cannot cross.
Yeah.
Oh no, and we had this discussion at a previous Chess 960 tournament. I remember. There was a guy who made like a big mistake because he didn't realize he could just castle. He thought he
Yeah.
wasn't allowed to cast. I forget who it was. I feel like it was like Svidler or something.
Hmm. Yeah, it rings a bell, but I think since the king isn't actually
Yeah.
doesn't have to
The
cross
the
the
king
d
isn't
file.
traveling past it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter that white would have the rook pointing down. Black would still be allowed to. Wow, wow. No, this is. Yeah, I'm gonna. Yeah, I'm gonna need at least 3 days to get used to this being chess 960. The problem is, in 3 days, the tournament is over.
I know, bear with us, guys. On Sunday, by Sunday, we should have the rules down. But okay, still, I think the idea that you're highlighting is perfectly reasonable. In fact, now if bishop a3, I guess black, well, actually, black can go c5 or knight e7, yeah?
Yeah,
Knight e7.
c5 you could do, but then there's gonna be no black pawns that are able to control
Mm.
the d5 square, which feels like a big long-term weakness.
Yeah,
So I'm
so
guessing if Hikaru comes out here to attack the rook, probably Ray is just gonna block that.
mhm. Yeah, knight
And
e7
then
makes a lot of sense.
If the knight out, then maybe Ray will try to do the same thing to Hikaru.
And the problem is Hikaru will not be able to block then. Rook g1, I guess, is not a move we really want to make. But neither is c4 for the reasons
Yeah.
you just highlighted. By the way, great question from a Susporus fan. What's the time control? There's been so much happening that we haven't even addressed that yet. The time control is 20 minutes plus 5 second plus 5, but it's not plus 5 because it's not an increment, it's a delay. I think the Americans among you guys will be more familiar with this time control. I don't know, Jan Ludwig, if you're able to explain it more succinctly that I would manage.
Um it means that you don't get more time, but you can avoid losing time. I don't know. It's
I think, yeah, basically from it ticks down, and if you spend 5 seconds on your move, you will get the 5 seconds back. But if you spend only 1 second, you will still only go back to where you were. Like basically, you're never gonna go up in time. I think you're never gonna get more time. And I actually this summer I played a blitz tournament which used delay, which is super rare in Europe, and I wasn't
well,
aware.
I'm not
And
sure they're actually using delay. I may have misled you there.
oh,
I don't know. It seems in the rules that it is 5 seconds. It's easy to get confused because the Americans often use this delay, which is a very much an American phenomenon,
yeah,
but it doesn't actually specify delay in the rules.
I'm sure someone is gonna inform us. I wasn't sure either. I thought I had seen it somewhere, but maybe the delay I saw was about the broadcast. It's all very confusing, guys. It's day one. Bear with us.
Day
Soon we'll
one,
know.
poorly researched commentators and tricky version of chess. But
Yeah.
now Hikaru's been thinking for. Oh no, Hikaru hasn't been thinking for this long. I just didn't stay up to date with the game. My bad. Okay, so Hikaru did, without me noticing, play this bishop out to attack the rook on f8. And like we predicted, Ray did not block with the pawn. He doesn't want to allow this square on d5 to be impossible to attack
By the
with
way, Jan
pawns.
Ludwig, can you just scroll back up on your
Oh yes,
screen?
sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
Um if it's not one thing, it's another. So instead, Ray blocked the threat to his rook with
Mhm.
the bishop. Then Hikaru did play knight e3, which this is just the variation we were looking at, Fiona.
Mhm.
I mean, we're psychic,
Yeah, that is quite crazy.
and Ray
It's hard to
also.
believe that these two people who don't know what is the time control, how to castle, that they would call, the line correctly.
At least we're getting one thing right.
Yeah.
So the counterattack on the white rook, and Hikaru doesn't have this kind of blocking move like the one Ray had. So Hikaru actually has to move the rook out of the way. Ray then centralizes his knight, and I assume now Hikaru will castle. And this offers a prime opportunity for us to display how castling is done. I'm gonna. Oh no, I didn't do it in time, but Hikaru did it for me. So look at that. We were here with the king and rook. So essentially, it just looks like normal chess after the fact, but in the execution itself, it's weird. The king goes one step to the right, the rook goes 3 steps to the right. but it looks like a normal castling. And confirmed, like Fiona said, Ray is allowed to castle as well. Normally, he wouldn't be allowed to because the white rook is controlling d8. So if the black king was on this e8 square, in order to castle and reach the castling square, it would have to cross a square controlled by the enemy, which is not allowed. But since the king is not over there, since it's here, it actually turns out you are allowed to castle, even if then the rooks are, even if that wouldn't be allowed in normal chess.
Absolutely. And Ray is still thinking about whether he wants to castle or not. What do you think are other moves that he might be thinking about?
I don't know. I feel like he's thinking, do the rules allow me to castle? I mean, that's like a legitimate concern, no? Okay,
Yeah,
he
because
actually goes knight d4 instead.
uh-huh.
I'm curious whether he thinks this is a better move or if he feels like he needs to move the knight up so that the white rook no longer controls d8 and so he can castle.
That's, I mean, it could very well be, right? Because how embarrassing would it be if you try and castle? I mean, it might not be the end of the world here because I guess, or do you think King B7 would be terrible? It would be pretty terrible, yeah. I would find it hilarious if they asked Rob later on if that was the case.
Wow, Hikaru now plays king b1, which is very surprising to me, but now I'm actually realizing why. It was the computer's top choice, but I thought it was very weird. Um, but actually, Hikaru doesn't want to trade in the center because then the black pawn comes up and
Mhm.
dislodges the white knight. Um, and so I thought Hikaru would then want to move his pawn up so that his bishop could recapture the knight, allowing the bishop to get into the game.
Mhm.
However, it turns out there's already threats. The
Oh
knight
wow.
has protection from the bishop, which would allow the knight to do a fork on the king and on the rook.
Those tactics, you always have to be alert. I mean, it's true that it felt so early and it's such an unusual position, right? Because we very rarely see the king on c1, the rook on g1. So that's one of the things I think that also makes chess 960 so interesting. You really have to be focused from the start. And as you mentioned earlier, normal patterns um, don't apply, or at least rarely apply. So yeah, Hikaru has to be a little bit mindful. So King B1 steps out of any potential forks on E2.
But now I'm surprised. Why didn't Ray capture the white knight? Because then Hikaru would get doubled pawns. However, the computer says that this position is massively favorable for Hikaru, despite the kind of poor pawn structure, with the pawns no longer being able to support each other. For instance, this ugly duckling on the
Mhm.
right hand side. So, good decisions being made by both players. Ray decides not to make the trade, not to create that bad pawn structure. Instead, he does that fancy queenside castling here. And Hikaru now has to decide how to bring his pieces into the fray. And he needs to decide what he's going to do about these knights looking at each other.
I'm especially, I mean, you mentioned how to, bring the pieces into the game. Now I'm looking at this bishop on H1, which you mentioned earlier. We put a pawn on E4, we put the knight on F3. So I think Hikaru's move G3 makes a lot of sense to finally give this bishop a little bit of scope.
Yeah, and that's what Hikaru has done. Both the corner bishops being bad right now, which I suppose also was predictable. looking at the position, the starting position when we got it, we were discussing a bit what would happen, and well, essentially these corner bishops would either be monsters or terrible.
Mm-hmm.
There
Yeah.
was nothing really in between.
And how would you evaluate them of roughly even strength now, or do you think one of the two bishops has the upper hand?
No, I think they're pretty much evenly bad. Both bishops being blocked by a central pawn, not really having any hope of improving their positioning anytime soon. Although it must be said, interesting decision here from Ray. Ray had the option of pushing this pawn up to c5 earlier, but chose not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Here, he's had a change of heart, and there's now no black pawns that are able to control the d5 square, meaning that if Hikaru could get his knight in here, that would be amazing. He does have the knight close by, but he can't do it immediately because there is a black defensive knight guarding that square right now. So I guess Hikaru will want to try to remove this defensive knight somehow.
Mhm. I was looking at c3, but c3 feels very weakening, no?
Well, c3 is kind of like the move you want to play unless there's a
Hmm.
problem. But as you can tell from the eval bar,
There is
making
a problem.
bit of a of a change with
Yeah.
that move being put on the board. Knight to e2 then would attack the rook. It's not a double attack on the rook and on the king, but even so, after a trade and this rook moving away, yeah, there's
Yeah.
problems with just too many black pieces feeling comfortable inside white's half of the board. And Hikaru, he goes in a different direction, and he's sick of the threats this bishop is creating into his position. Hikaru goes pawn to c4, trying to shut down the position, but right now, that also means that his pawn can no longer position itself to attack the black knight. Um, and that's a problem. This knight is a monster for Ray right now, and you see that also in the eval with the computers favoring black, despite the position being very equal in piece placements. The one piece that's not equally placed is this knight in the center, and that's enough to give black the edge. And look at this. Ray
Yeah.
immediately tries to take advantage of his
I was just
well-placed
gonna
knight.
say the other difference in the positions is that for Hikaru there's a knight on f3 that's blocking that f pawn because you want to use the f pawn in order to break open the center, in order to activate that bishop, the light squared bishop. Well, not the light squared, what am I saying? The bishop in h1 and h8. You want to activate them. And now Ray is able to strike first because that F file was free. Hikaru quickly decides to take.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because the pawn in the center was the pawn that was blocking his corner bishop. So by capturing, Hikaru now creates some attacking chances for himself. When Ray recaptures, Hikaru can make the trade in the center. And then there will be scary moments for this black king as the diagonal for the bishop opens up. However, Ray can hope that the same thing will happen for him, even if right now he does have one of his own pawns blocking the diagonal. And all
Yeah,
of this is happening.
all of this is happening. White did take on d4. And we have now landed in the live position. Now, the knight is under attack. What are candidate squares for the knight?
Um So I oftentimes you want to move forward with your pieces.
Hmm.
Um, so what's the disadvantage of moving forward here? Oh wow. The computer is suggesting a massive plan for Ray if Hikaru tries to get that knight well placed in the center. It will be traded first off, but that's okay because our bishop takes over the magnificent placement in the center. And here, Black has an incredible resource in sacrificing the rook for the bishop. This isolates the white pawn in the center, but it also just gives black really good control of the light squares, since we now no longer have a light squared bishop. And computers even suggesting moves like queen to e4, actively trying to get the queen trade, but getting the queen trade in such a way that these pawns, supported from a distance by the bishops, is just such a menace to deal with.
I mean, that's an unbelievably powerful exchange sacrifice. When I first saw it pop up on the engine, from a distance, I thought there must be a tactical point to it, but no, it's just the power of those pawns supported by the bishop here, as you mentioned. So knight d5, while I think the most tempting move, if I was playing a blitz game, I think that's the first move I would I would make that move instinctively. I would think, okay, I want to go forward. I want to have central control. The knight, the d5, the square is under my control, but the
Yeah, and
exchange sacrifice.
it also turns out if black doesn't capture the bishop here, this is completely fine for white. So
Hmm.
it's like one of those do or die moments where
Hmm.
there's one big problem with it and everything else is okay. So oftentimes you're more likely to fall for something that only has one problem with it because you're more likely to kind of underestimate or miss a single move rather than positions where there are multiple good choices for the opponent. That being said, Hikaru did see that exchange sacrifice, and he avoided it by moving his knight back instead.
Of course, going backward is not what you want to do. I also see that the computer, it didn't like knight d5, but it also didn't like the knight jumping back to f1. Let's try and understand why.
Yeah, that's
It's
good.
a tough one, huh?
You wanna do it?
That's why I said let's try and understand, because even with seeing
Well,
the engine, I don't understand why
let's
it's so
is short for let us, but what you're really saying is hammer, do your
let
thing, or
you, you're the chess analyst here.
yeah, I don't
That's a
know.
loss.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure why that was so much worse than the other options. But the good thing is, if Hikaru doesn't understand it, if I don't understand it,
Yeah.
well, rather the other way around, it probably means that Ray is not gonna understand it either. And already after his next move, moving the knight back, the eval bar calms down quite a bit. That being said, I do like Ray's move because look where he's headed. He's headed for this c3 square from which he can attack both the white king and the white rook and just be super annoying. So there's a very clear plan with the move Ray played, and both players are down to less than 10 minutes at this stage. So time trouble is definitely becoming a concern for both of them. The queens are up against each other in the center of the board, but right now both players are ignoring the queens, just letting them sit there. And I think this is a really good display of patience that we can all learn from. Hikaru says, I don't want to be the one to trade queens. Hikaru says, if I trade queens, black is the one who's going to be able to have a rook pointing down the open file, the file where there are no pawns blocking the rook's influence. And then Ray says the same thing. I don't want to be the one capturing Hikaru's queen. That would allow Hikaru to get his rook into the open file for free. So both players are just letting these queens have like a stare down competition, because neither one of them wants to be the one to allow the opponent's rooks getting a better position.
The problem is, if you Ray on the next move, you could. Well, he could have done it on the. I was gonna say it's easier for Ray to get his queen out of the way, right? To suddenly say, okay, you didn't want to
And
exchange
not,
queens.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and not just out of the way, but also making some scary looking threats towards the opponent's king.
Yeah, I have to confess, and I think if you're white, you have to worry at every turn, right? When you're playing this game of, oh, I don't want to swap, but black might at some point, if as white you're stubborn and you don't exchange, black might at some point say, okay, well now, now it's too late. So do you feel that Hikaru can get away with continuing playing this game?
I think so. If for no other reason than the time situation, kind of being one where keeping the queens on the board will be beneficial in terms of like when you have a bad position like Hikaru definitely does have here. Hikaru is under massive pressure. This knight trying to make its way up the board is a problem. Um, so when you're under pressure like Hikaru's now, I feel like often then you might want to keep the queens on because it's easier to trick the opponent with the queens on, especially since Ray doesn't actually have that many pieces protecting his king. Like Ray's
Mm-hmm.
king is fine right now, but that's because there are no attacking pieces for white. If that were to change, the black king would feel rather chilly. And look at this. Wow, Hikaru really trying to create some complications here. Uh with the players getting lower on time, pawn to b4, that's a very enterprising move, trying to break up this perfect coordination of black's pawns, protecting each other up the board. In particular, this pawn on c5 is the issue because that pawn was blocking the white bishop. If Hikaru now can get this trade, the bishop will have a new lease on life.
I was gonna say I would be so worried though, because playing b4 suddenly weakens the a4 square. It also in general weakens your king on b1. Is his point that is queen a4 not a move because we also lose control of e6 now?
I mean, I would think so. Otherwise, this
Mm-hmm.
queen move just looks devastating. That being said, if Ray can get away from the checks, the threats this queen move would make on the bishop and on the pawn could still justify um, allowing the white queen to come in. Ray doesn't want to do that though. He plays the queen one step forward. Maybe this is wow. No, I think this is brilliant from Ray Robson. His idea is that he moves his queen out of the way, so now no more queen trade for Hikaru. But he moves the queen so that he still controls the e6 square, making sure that Hikaru cannot move forward. And essentially, what's happening right now is that next move, black will use the rook to kick the queen. And when the queen has, so say Hikaru does a nothing move, the rook
Mm-hmm.
will come in, attack the queen. And when the queen moves out of the way, then the black queen can proceed with the plan on the queen side.
Yeah, queen d7 is a really nice move. By Rob. I have to say I like it because I was looking at Queen A4, but it's such a nice, such a good lesson. I think it's a very instructive moment to not rush. Ray understands his position is good because yes, now it's Hikaru's move, but what can Hikaru really do? It's difficult for White to find a move that really improves the position. Right now, it's difficult to
Well,
set for the. Mhm.
yeah, but Hikaru can take a pawn, no?
Oh, that is a fair point. That is a fair point.
So it is still kind of like a pawn sacrifice from Ray. I'm
But
really
isn't there
amazed.
some rookie 8 followed by queen a4?
Yeah, so let's check it out. Pawn takes pawn seems like the obvious choice for Hikaru. Rook comes in, attacks the queen. We can move the queen away. And if queen to a4, that I thought was going to be really good, well, the white queen can actually get into position to protect the bishop, and we're still up a pawn. The computer says that black is winning, but honestly, with the time situation being what it is, this is anyone's game. Hikaru chooses a different path, but it's a similar path. So Hikaru plays queen f1, still means he's going for that d3 square, which is a very nice square for the queen. So say now if the rook comes to take the open file and the queen comes up, this queen is now attacking the black pawn. It's preventing this other black pawn from moving forward. It's also do I have another color? It's also giving protection to the pawn on c4. So it's just like doing 3, 4 things at the same time, which is precisely what you want from the most powerful piece on the board.
Mhm. However, if we go back to the live position, the chat, of course, was quick to point out this move is -5. Why, again, why is that? To the human eye, it's not so obvious at all. That I
Yeah, I mean,
understand the position. Mhm.
if I'm playing this with black, I'm preventing Hikaru's plan. Hikaru wants to move the queen to d3. I go d3 to prevent that from happening. Also opening up for my bishop in towards the white king. But then Hikaru will actually find another route for that queen to work together with the bishop, joining the attack against the black king. And as we were saying earlier, the queen getting into if we can get more attacking pieces against the black king isn't actually that well defended. So Hikaru has a lot of nice ideas here. The computer is saying this is over because of knight to e4, which is just a very strange move because you're literally giving away your pawn in the middle. And then the computer says you give away another pawn in the middle. And then the computer says that black wins, coordinating both the rook and the queen on the
I mean,
diagonal.
Ray Robson was Mr. Puzzle Rush, right? So this
Yeah.
is his chance. If he finds this,
Well, he didn't find it. So yeah, no, he had this opportunity to sacrifice 2 pawns and win the game, but it's that's just a
very
very
tricky.
tricky thing to
Yeah.
find. Instead, he tried to just play logical chess in terms of putting your rook on the open file, but Hikaru then gets his queen where he wants it to be. And importantly, Ray now down to less than 2 minutes on the clock.
Yeah, the time is becoming a factor now. And there's still, I mean, the pawn on c5 is still under attack, right?
Yeah,
Eventually you should, I mean, does black have to do something about it now? Or
I
can
mean, I thought Black had to do something about it 2 moves ago. So far,
Mm.
Ray has proven me wrong, but sooner or later, I would think that's an issue. Not only to mention the fact that, like, if you're not paying attention now, not only can you capture this pawn with the bishop, you might just ignore the bishop altogether and say, I don't want to take that with the bishop. I want to use my knight for that task because
Mhm.
then my knight can both attack the queen and the bishop and just get involved with an attack against the black king. So it's I would say quite a serious threat to the pawn on c5.
And so, okay, if this is a serious threat, then how do we? I guess Black never wants to take on b4 himself.
I don't know. I mean, if the alternative is losing the pawn, I would say making the trade is better. Because right
Is
now,
there no good way
how do
to
you protect the
defend?
pawn? You cannot protect it. If your queen moves over to protect, well then your queen
Mm,
leaves the defense of the f5 pawn, allowing
yeah.
Hikaru to take that one.
You raise a very good point, and the
Well,
time is Ray Robson really down to 10 seconds?
well,
Oh,
Ray's time management is unreal. Ray has had horrible time management for a decade
but
already, and he's not that old of a guy. So he
true.
definitely. Oh, actually, no, he got more time on the clock. That kind of surprises me. Maybe there was no. After the move
No,
was made, he had 11
wow.
seconds. He did make the trade, but he's down to 11 seconds. Wow, but he's making some fancy schmancy moves. Knight to d5. That knight is being attacked both by a bishop and a pawn. The pawn cannot capture because then we're going to lose our queen. So I guess that's why we're going to take it with the bishop. That being said, the queen will recapture, and then we still kind of don't want to take this queen because we're not losing anything, but because it's kind of like a queen for a queen situation, but we are allowing the black bishops to create quite a bit of a mess.
Yeah, so after 95, how much time does Hikaru have? Sorry. Okay, 4 minutes
He's
maybe?
at 350.
And okay, let's take one more moment here. If he doesn't take at all, what's the threat? Knight c3?
Well,
Oh,
definitely
there's the
taking the
bishop under
bishop.
attack.
Yeah.
Okay, if the bishop moves, well, the
If the
bishop
bishop
cannot move, then knight
moves, then the
c3.
knight comes in.
Yeah. So we have to take, or
I I would say it looks that way, but this is a super complicated position. This game blew up.
it really did.
So I'm not taking anything for granted here. And Hikaru doesn't take. Hikaru moves his queen, allows the black knight to capture the white bishop, but if Ray does that, then the queen will get access to the black king. However, Ray takes the bishop anyway because he only had 10 seconds left. And then Hikaru comes in with the queen. Check, check. Hikaru now down a full bishop, but the black king cannot escape from the white queen's checks. If the king tries to make a break for it through the middle of the board, the white queen will come in, check on the king, and also pick up the knight. So that would just lose a couple of pawns and a knight and would actually give the advantage to Hikaru, which is why the guys have agreed to a draw with just the queen and king going back and forth.
Draw agreed indeed. What a game. I think Hikaru should be quite happy, objectively speaking, with this result, seeing how the game went. And maybe we can take a look at some other games. I see Garry is still playing, and Gary's in great shape. Maybe we can go there if we have an easy way of doing that.
I don't know about easy.
Um,
I can scroll, then I can probably switch, but then it's gonna be ugly scroll
if it's
for a
just for one
moment.
second, I think that's fine. Yeah, like let's just pick the game there.
Okay, Garry Kasparov having a winning position right now against Wesley So. He has a rook in trade for a bishop. Um, it's not a massive advantage rook for bishop, but the computer is really happy about it. Garry has 3 pawns close to his king. The
Mhm.
pawns aren't really doing that great job of protecting the king, but as long as there's no white piece that can come in to attack the king, I guess that's fine.
And I mean, where is the queen? Is the queen? No, it's not trapped just yet. So where
But the
can it go?
problem
G.
is when the queen now moves, the black rook will be able to come forward. The thing holding white's position together right now is the rook on f2. This rook is preventing the black pawn from advancing to become a new queen. And now, no matter where Wesley moves his queen away, Garry will go rook to e2, challenging the blockading rook. And as the blockading rook is traded off, the black pawn will just become a new queen soon enough.
And it looks like I don't think Wesley has resigned just yet. Oh, actually, this is on the board: Queen h6, Rook e2. But what is that? Are you surprised?
It's Garry. Yeah, maybe not
Gary
expertise.
effing
It's
Kasparov.
Garry effing Kasparov. No, I'm not surprised.
But I mean, Gary hasn't had great results in the events he has. I mean, he barely plays outside of St. Louis or outside of the Grand Chateau, but he's had a run of, as far as I can remember, let's say, not great results. No,
Yeah.
he must be rusty as well. I mean, taking down Wesley with the black pieces, I know it's
No, it's
Gary.
a good result. I would be very happy to beat Wesley, but like it's not the most shocking thing in the world that one of the greatest to ever play the game wins a game.
Also, the other thing is Wesley actually has had a quite a shocking run of form recently.
Yeah, no, yeah, Wesley not really playing his best chess. I thought you were going elsewhere with that because I guess Wesley is the reigning world champion. No, no, is
Or is it
Hikaru the reigning
Hikaru? I
champion?
think it's Hikaru
Oh,
actually.
it might be Hikaru. I remember the absolute beating Wesley gave Magnus in the
Yeah.
Chess 960 World Championship. It is just the meanest thing I have ever seen. I've never seen anyone completely destroy Magnus like Wesley did in that Chess 960 World Championship final some years ago. So I guess I'm surprised in that Wesley has had some good results in this variant.
Yeah, I mean, well, we'll see. There's 9 rounds in this. We see also that Wesley has resigned because his king on a2 was about to get checkmated. He could have thrown in a few checks, but the black king would have managed too high. There's one game only still going, that is Sam Savian against Levon Aronian.
Well, there's this thing. Oh, actually, a run-in is not winning. I just assumed a run-in was winning because his pawns are further to the edge than white's pawns. And normally that's not an advantage, but in the end games, it often is.
Mm-hmm.
Because the pawns on the side of the board can work as distractions. And just as I'm saying that, the eval bar is back in it, saying that no, the position that it thought was a draw for a little while, it is now again winning for black. And to me, it makes perfect sense because black has those pawns on the side of the board, which are really good as decoys in
Mm-hmm.
endgames.
But how easy is it to, is it, I mean, what is the plan to convert
Well,
this?
nothing is easy with 10 seconds on the
Yeah.
clock, let me tell you. So far, I think Levon is doing a good job with it. Somehow he needs to get his king involved right now. It's not really clear how he's gonna make that happen. Computer says bishop to g7 is the only winning move. He's never gonna find that.
No.
Uh, wow. Bishop to g7. Like, number one, you're moving away from the pawn you thought you needed to protect. But you could have done that in different ways as well. Why was that one square so important? Uh, I don't understand. Oh, look at this. No. Why was it important to have the so the game is going to be a draw now, I think. I kind of went on a tangent, but
Hmm.
I think that's because I was kind of happy with this game ending in a draw. Oh wow. No, this game is not ending in a draw. Sam Sevian suddenly has chances to win it. If the black bishop no longer manages to protect its own pawn, then the white king will come in and capture stuff. Ooh, but look at this. If you go with the knight to block the bishop's path here, then black wins with a breakthrough on the other side, first sacrificing one pawn, then sacrificing your bishop, only to have the last pawn on the side of the board actually win the game because the knight is not able to stop it. Wow, this is some really fancy stuff with only 10 seconds left on the clock. Both players kind of realizing what to avoid. Although here, the white knight has maneuvered itself to capture the black pawn. But once again, yeah,
I think it's
Sevian
just
not.
repeating. Yeah,
Yeah, he's not going to dare to take this pawn because then this
no.
pawn break once again is very, very dangerous.
Did he? No, he didn't take. No, so I expect him to go back to d4. Oh no, he's gonna wait like this. But basically, white is just gonna wait. Yeah, I think draw
Yeah.
is going to be agreed here shortly.
And now this pawn break with pawn to b4 and sacrificing your bishop doesn't work because the knight is protecting so that you don't have to allow a free path for the pawn on the edge. Oh wait! Oh wow! It happened.
Oh my goodness.
So Sevian used his knight to block the bishop's protection of the pawn. Then Aronian pushed the pawn forward. The sacrifice happened. Ooh, but look at this. The sacrifice happened. Aronian thought he had the game in the bag, but the knight comes to the rescue. The pawn, one step away from becoming a new queen. It looked like that pawn was queening, but the knight comes in with the check
Oh
first
my
and
God.
then gets back to block.
What a heartbreak. I mean, for Levon, chess is so brutal. Like one moment you think you're winning, the next moment you're losing. And here, basically, the E and the B pawns are running, and Levon is not in time. We see he tried to bring the king, but white is going to get a new queen. The king will be stuck in this in the corner after that, and that's the end, really. Wow. Wow, 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 what a game. I think the game is over. Levon has resigned. That was incredible. Jon Ludwig, I think we're going to go on a quick break because the action today is going to happen very fast. We'll be back in 8 minutes. We'll have the next starting position. And if I'm not mistaken, the games will start 23 minutes from now. So the position always comes out 15 minutes before. So we're going to get a quick break. We'll be here in 8 minutes at the latest from now. So don't go anywhere and we'll see you in a second. Hello and welcome back to our coverage of the Champions Showdown Chess 960. We are about to see game two in 12 minutes. For now, we have a new position. We don't see Hikaru analyzing right now. I predict he's not analyzing with Garry Kasparov anymore because Jon Ludwig, he is playing the man, the legend, the myth, Garry
Yeah,
Kasparov.
no. Last game we did see Hikaru and Garry analyzing the position together. That worked out better for Garry than Hikaru. Hikaru had the white pieces and was in trouble. Fortunate to make a draw against Ray Robson. While Garry Kasparov with the black pieces takes the win against none other than former Chess 960 world champion Wesley So, which means Hikaru now could kind of use a win against Garry Kasparov, who has taken an early lead in this tournament.
Yeah, Garry will be feeling good after that black victory. This is the position that you guys are seeing right now that they will be fighting it out in. This time, we see something different. The last time the queen was in the center, now it's all the way tucked away in the corner on A1, on A8. The king this time is on the king side. So we could potentially imagine that the white king can quite easily castle kingside. Just need to get the knight out of the way.
Yeah, but what's the benefit of that? Like, what is actually the benefit of castling
I didn't say there was any benefit. I just say
early?
we could see an early
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
kingside castle. I
No,
never
but
talked
very
about
often when we have these positions with the king and rook so close, I feel like they often just move the knights out and then they both castle. And I'm like, that's a little boring, no? Well, and
Yeah.
also it's like you have a bishop in the center of the board. You're not going to get your rook involved in the center anytime soon. This actually, I think this is interesting. I think this bishop is one of the worst pieces you
Mm-hmm.
could possibly imagine. And what I've kind of realized lately, and I've tried to make a big point out of it in my commentary, but bishops are very strange pieces in that when they are placed in the center of the board, they're actually worse when they're placed than when they're placed on the edges. Because when they're in the center, they're pointing to the edges.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to point to the edges. You want to point through the center. But the bishops is one of those few pieces then that actually prefer being on the side so that they can be on the side and point in towards the center. So I feel like these bishops are going to be one of the key things to be aware of, and trying to get those into a half decent spot. And since I'm making a point out of this, I guess something like pawn to d4, and if black tries to copy, maybe you can immediately put this bishop, get it out of the way, and point it down on the opponent's king.
Yeah, I was thinking actually along the lines of bringing that bishop to c3,
Okay. How do
but
you want to do
ideally
that?
not blocked by my own pawn. Let's say
So like
c4.
b4 to open up an attack here,
That's not
and
what
then
I was
go
thinking, but
d3, and
very
I don't know.
sneaky.
I kind of
No,
like it.
yeah, actually, I hadn't thought of the queen so much. I was thinking, oh, the bishop from b1 and the bishop from c3, if the two of them can sort of point
Oh
down,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, but that's a good point. How do you activate both this
Yeah.
bishop and the other bishop? Because you don't want to go d4, because then your bishop is going to be blocked by this pawn. But if you go d3, then this pawn is going to block
Mm-hmm.
the other bishop.
Just go d4 and hope your opponent lets you push to d5 on the next move.
Yeah, I mean that's an idea, but actually here that pawn would get into trouble really early on. I don't know. This
Yeah.
is I don't know. I think chess 960 is so tricky.
Have you ever played actually over the board?
Never over the board.
Hmm.
I played like some online qualifiers for they had open qualifiers for the
For
world
this
championship.
Reykjavik. Yeah.
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 So I tried to qualify and I was not very good.
Did you enjoy it?
No. I enjoy winning. And
Either
anything
you,
else is just misery.
well, either you win or you learn. So I guess you learn a lot, and now you're here to
I have
share.
learned too much in my life.
Okay, so
Actually,
let's
this
see.
is this is pretty much a quote from one of my favorite chess books. uh, Jonathan Rosen, The
Hmm.
Seven Deadly Chess Sins. He
Hmm.
writes this story about how he would always say after he had lost a game that he had learned. And then at some point, I think it was Baburin,
Uh-huh.
another grandmaster. He just said to him, at some point, you got to stop learning and start winning.
I actually don't remember that. I read the book a long, long time ago, but that's a fantastic, that is a fantastic quote. Okay, back to the position. So you were saying castling kingside is boring. So what do you want to do? Shove the H pawn up the board?
I want to do something with this guy. I want to get this guy into a half decent position. I just have no idea how I'm going to do it. Right now I'm thinking pawn to c4.
Mm-hmm.
Cuz we need to kind of first we need to grab some space and then maybe black copies us. I think in general in chess 960 I always just assume the opponent is going to copy. I feel like it's such a valid strat. Um And then maybe we can like move this bishop out, pointing down on the queen. No, but then we're
Mm-hmm.
gonna get chased. Um, I was thinking maybe we can open up here, and then maybe we go d4, and if there's a trade, our queen gets out. But then we can get this bishop, and somehow this can be good.
Mm-hmm.
And we've managed to do all of this without blocking the other bishop.
That would sort of be the dream, right? To get
Yeah.
all of these pieces in position.
And somehow the computer still says it's equal. No, better for black. This is what I don't understand about chess 960. Somehow the person making the pawn break in the center always ends up being worse. I feel like, and actually, like in the previous games, Ray had an advantage against Hikaru with the black pieces, and Garry beat Wesley with black. I feel like black is like quite a sneaky endeavor in chess 960 because the white player often feels like, oh, I gotta push forward and to
Mm-hmm.
justify kind of my extra move. And it just turns out you move your queen out early or a piece or something, and you just give your opponent the option of attacking that early development to turn the tables on you.
Question from the chat, Yun Ludwig. Why? Question from Lamiranta. Why not try d3, bishop d2, and play something hippo-ish?
Because in the hippo, you have no central control and you're super passive with your pawns. So, I mean, so the argument I made about bishops being in the center of the board, placing it on d2 doesn't really do anything to deal with that fact that the bishops do rather prefer being on the edges rather than in the center. This bishop hasn't really improved its positioning because it's still pointing out on the edges. And in the meantime, we've allowed black to take real control. So I'm not good enough to understand the solution, but I'm good enough to kind of be the one to ask the difficult questions. So my prediction is that the fate of these bishops that's going to be significant, and I have no idea how they're gonna make it work.
Yeah, I'm once again looking, at this queen on a1 that's pointing down the long diagonal. And much like in round one, I would love to just open up the scope of my queen and then push the H pawn, but I think you're just gonna block me again.
Do you want to go
And
2 steps, maybe?
mm, sure, why
Yeah, no,
not?
I'm always intrigued by these moves that prevents the opponent from copying.
Yeah.
So if you go 2 steps forward with this pawn and black tries to copy, then white can attack the black pawn. And if black tries to support, well, actually, this doesn't work out at all because after the trades, the queens have opened up along the edge of the
By the
board.
way,
And
sorry to interrupt you for a second, Jon Ludwig, but we have the video confirmation that Garry indeed is not preparing with Hikaru. He's now checking
yeah,
the
but
position with Wesley, and they have b4 on the board, actually.
yeah, your move. It's happening.
I'm actually in shock. I was like, oh, I'm curious. What do they have on the board? What? To be
Okay,
fair,
so
you encouraged me to push it forward 2 squares.
I don't see how this deals with the bishop on e1, but sometimes just grabbing space is good. And I
Maybe
think
there's no
especially
rush.
I think they want to look at stuff where the opponent cannot copy them. So it's like if you go c4, then the opponent goes c5 and they just match your move. Whereas because this copy strategy doesn't really work with white immediately getting the pressure on the side of the board, that might be extra enticing.
Yeah, and we see Garry there arriving for the game. Interesting by the game, by the way, I just realized that Garry and Wesley would be analyzing together after Garry just inflicted what seemed to be quite a tough loss on Wesley. So we see Wesley not holding any grudges, still, of course, happy. I'm sure that whoever Garry asks, do you want to look at the position with me, will happily say yes.
I would think so. What is the thing they're signing?
Yeah, I was wondering as well.
Because they're not writing down the moves. DGT official chess set? Are they signing that they used the chess sets? Is it like a letter of certification that this chess set was used by Garry and Hikaru? It kind of looks like it.
Interesting.
Okay, they're getting ready to play. We're gonna switch over from the analysis board
Mhm.
to the game board. Oh, they kind of switched away from the Garry situation, but I fixed it. And Garry doesn't go b4. I'm disappointed by that. I was starting to really like this b4 move.
But
He goes,
c4 opens up that other bishop, right? And I think they had both actually. The moment I saw the video, they had both c4 and b4 on
yeah,
the
no,
board.
this is
But
definitely what he analyzed, but I don't like the c4 move as much as the b4 move because it makes Hikaru's reply easier. I feel like after c4, it's very easy for Hikaru to just copy.
Mhm.
Whereas if you had played this b4 move,
Oh,
we saw that copying.
let's flip the board since
Yeah.
Hikaru is playing black.
Hmm.
I think on the burger, yeah.
The burger. Let me also turn on the engine. So I did kind of like this idea more because it prevented black from just copying
Mhm.
without there being immediate pressure. Whereas now, after the c4 Garry played, Hikaru can just copy. Hikaru plays that same c5 move. When Garry moves his knight into the game, Hikaru does the same thing. And now with Garry going for that opening up of the queen, I'm thinking, why can't Hikaru just do the same?
Do you think we will just see the players castle kingside quickly?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Hikaru decides not to copy Garry any further and instead brings his knight out to c6, something you mentioned earlier on, right? That you like to get
Yeah.
the knights behind the pawns.
I really like this kind of formation where the pawns and the knights are working towards the same squares. But I do not like how this affects the queen. So now the queen is a bit more blocked in for Hikaru. I'm really interested in seeing how Hikaru and Garry copes with this bishop in the center of the board.
Yeah, interesting. I feel like both times we saw Hikaru's game, he got a piece kind of stuck in that bottom right corner, right? Earlier it was a bishop on h1 that was blocked by its own pieces. But here, okay, I mean, Black Hikaru might play b6 later on, and the queen is not, as long as it's not blocked by a pawn chain, let's say, I think things are not so dramatic. And Garry is taking some time here. We talked about the possibility Garry is now ready to castle kingside if he wants. But
I don't know
if
how to make arrows for castling kingside because I cannot make the arrow for king to g1. In fact, if this game was played online, if you make the move king to g1, then it doesn't castle.
yeah,
You actually have to, king to g1, both is a legal move and the castling move. In order to do the castles when playing online, you actually have to put the king on top of the rook to signalize that you wanted to castle.
yeah, absolutely. In in the real game, I think it doesn't. Wasn't there this discussion in the Nippo game if you touch the rook first or the king first? No, maybe I'm
You're
mistaken.
supposed to castle using the king.
Always with the king first. Yeah, the rules are the
But
same.
yeah, I remember the episode you mentioned.
There was
Garry
something.
plays rather a
Mhm.
controversial move. Oh no, pawn to e3. For a moment there, I thought he had played pawn to d3, but that would be weird, blocking his own bishop.
But
Instead, pawn to e3 is an attempt to take control in the center and enable
mhm.
himself to go pawn to d4 afterwards.
Okay, let me ask you a crazy question. Let me just. I was wondering if Hikaru could ever play e5, but I guess giving up control over d5 forever is terrible.
Yeah, it's very controversial to have move both your pawns
I think
forever.
controversially you're letting me off the hook
Ah,
nicely.
maybe.
Thank you, Hannah. I
Um,
appreciate it.
but he carved very quickly. So this e3 move was played, and he carved very quickly played b6 to try and open up for his queen. But he could have done that previous move as well. I don't know why he wanted to move the knight first and then open for his queen. Garry castles,
You know what?
and I guess
I'm getting deja vu when we were commentating on the World Cup, and you'll know better than me which game it was when we were so perplexed. Why did Hikaru first play that move? I think it was against Venkataraman, like one of the early games. And we even asked him in the interview, why did you make that move first? And I think there was no particular reason. We had been wondering for nothing.
yeah,
Do you know what
yeah
I'm on
the
about?
yeah the early draw when Hikaru had the black pieces, I think.
Yeah, I think that's the
Um,
one. Anyway, I digress.
yeah, well, you digress because I think Hikaru's move here is rather obvious.
Hmm.
After Garry castles, I guess there's no reason not to castle for Hikaru in return. And this position is like it's very calm, but it's a weird calm because
Okay,
it could get really spicy pretty quickly. Because the
hear me
way,
out.
okay,
Can we go queen side somehow? Can we? You wanted more spice. We can't do it immediately. I mean, instead of, can we somehow, yeah, because we're not so far removed. Can I play h5? You wanted spice. I'll try and give you spice and see just how bad does the computer think this is?
well, why h5? Why not g5 then?
Because my pawn is hanging,
Yeah, but then the
but
rook and the queen working
queen,
together.
yeah.
And then we have a bishop on this diagonal as well. Computer is not a massive fan, I'll admit.
H7 is hanging as well, but can white be so greedy?
Well, if you take this one, I assume something bad is going to happen because there's a lot of pieces pointing towards the white king. Okay, computer says nothing bad is going to happen. That kind of, yeah, that's a problem. Hikaru instead castles, unsurprisingly. But now Garry pushes forward in the center. This is interesting. Because now, if white is allowed to play the pawn to d5, that's pretty much game over. If pawn to d5, the black queen will have been buried alive on the edge in the corner of the board. However, the obvious way of preventing the pawn from pushing further forward is to first make the trade because
Mhm.
you wanted to avoid that the white pawn captures the black pawn. So first you have to trade, and then in order to stop this advance, you need to put the pawn there yourself. However, the trade of the pawns in the center has freed up the square e3 for the white knight. And now this knight can come into a great central square and put immediate pressure on the d5 pawn.
And what do we make of this resulting position?
I don't know. To me, it kind of looks equal because Hikaru can just support, and he has pretty good support. But the computer likes it for white, even if I'm not entirely convinced.
Okay, so this Hikaru's decision right now, how to react. Do
I
you
think,
think anything
well,
but taking is bad, basically?
no, I think anything that allows the white pawn to advance further is bad.
Mhm.
So I would think a move like pawn to e6 should be fine. Because then if the pawn advances, well, then we just take it. Ooh, look at this, Fiona. We were looking for spice, but we've kind of found spice in the wrong direction. Wow. If Hikaru placed this e6 move, I thought that moving the pawn up, taking control of the d5 square, prevented white from pushing on further. But it turns out, as a pawn sacrifice, this is incredibly good because then you get the bishop, and this is kind of what we were talking about when we got the position. How can we get the two bishops and the queen to work together? And this pawn sacrifice in the center is what brings all of white's pieces to life. So it turns out Hikaru absolutely cannot play e6. Instead, he needs to capture in the center, and that's what he's done. And now also, once again, if pawn to e6, this same sacrifice is super effective, allowing the queen and the two bishops to work so beautifully together against the black king. Hikaru instead needs to prevent this advance and does do that. He plays d5. Yeah, the white knight comes in to try and increase the pressure. But as we analyzed, we had this position on the board. And I did say that I thought this is okay for Hikaru, and that is still my belief.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that the computer would give white a little edge. White has a bit more central control. White has a little bit more space, but the position is very solid. The two bishops that we've been talking about so much are still on e1 and e8. In this new position, what kind of future do you envision for them?
Not a super bright one. So now that the pawns have entered the central area of the board, we know much more about how it's going to look. And basically, white has a very important central pawn on a dark square, and black has a very important central pawn on the light squares. And that means the dark squared bishop will be blocked by its own pawn, as will Hikaru's light squared bishop. So both of these bishops are also the pieces uh, being restricted by the central pawn's influence. And I'm guessing that's not really a coincidence because both players kind of saying, yeah, that bishop is going to be a problem regardless.
Mm-hmm.
So it might as well kind of, I don't know, defend the pawn in the center or have some kind of. It's not going to be a monster in this game
No.
anyway, so we might as well put our pawns on that color.
Yeah, I mean, in that previous line, if black had gone e6 and this d5, this bishop c3 shot there was so
Yeah.
nice. The bishop would really have been a hero. I wanted to get to a comment from the chat from Burner. Something I never thought about. They're saying getting up and taking a look at the other boards has to be such an advantage in 960 because Hikaru had just gone up from the board. We saw him walking around. I was originally thinking, surely that's not true because you already made your own mind up, and in general, you wouldn't get up in the early moves. But what do you make of it?
No, I think it's a good point.
Yeah.
I think looking at the other positions could inspire some ideas in your own
Mm-hmm.
game.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very astute observation.
Yeah, I have to say as well, like my original thought was surely not, and then the more I thought about it, the more I thought it's a very interesting point and it's also interesting to me that I don't feel I've seen someone make that point before. So shout out Burner, good thinking. And the problem for Hikaru is this is not a position where he's going to get too inspired. It doesn't feel like there's any, creative shots or any fireworks in the air here. This resembles already, not a normal classical game, but we are sort of back in positions that we're familiar with. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, definitely,
Mm.
definitely. Like one thing, if we just move this black rook over to the other side of the bishop, I could easily kind of see this position being from a real game. And then kind of you moved your rook over and then you moved your bishop back so that your rook can influence on the d file. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is this bishop is the only thing
Mm.
making it weird.
And
Um,
the queens in the corner, maybe it would be hard to.
no, because that I
No,
feel like is not okay. So the
you
queens will
can
move
also
one
fix it
step up.
quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not the most outrageous queen placement I've ever seen. It's having some influence in towards the center, and it's close enough to the action to react if needed.
Yeah.
But the time
Gary,
taken here
yeah,
by Kasparov is it's a bit much, no?
I was just gonna say, I'm surprised. What do you think Gary is thinking about? What candidate moves is he considering?
Um, I guess if you want to play it safe, Garry already won his first game in the tournament. He's coming up against Hikaru, who's probably one of the pre-tournament favorites.
Mm-hmm.
So holding on to that half-point lead he has against Hikaru would be fine. So capturing in the center would keep the position super safe and a probable draw from that. And if he wants to push very hard for a win, which kind of was his thing during
Mm-hmm.
his career, then probably he'll want to try and advance the pawns on the queen side. and you could see a situation where white pushes these two pawns on the side, and then black pushes the pawns in the center. And this just becomes a huge mess. Like, yeah, the black pawns are advancing, but then the white pawns will also advance. And right now, in the span of two moves of me just making what I thought was sensible moves, the computer went from saying it's equal to saying black is much better to saying white is much better, which really just emphasizes how complicated this kind of pawn race and imbalance is, with one player having two extra pawns on the side, the other player having two extra pawns in the middle.
Yeah, and I think Gary is gonna not go for some. I think it would be great for us. I would love to see something like this. But especially as Gary's time is ticking down, I think the less time you leave yourself with, the more averse you will be to going for something more double-edged, especially, of course, when it is Hikaru. And Gary's body language is interesting as well. I mean, we saw him, Gary doesn't look happy, which is hard for me to understand. I struggle to believe he dislikes his position. He's sort of, huffing and puffing, shaking his head.
Remind you of anyone?
Of, of Hikaru.
Yeah,
Yeah.
greatness. It's just it's the style of greatness, no?
I think maybe he's just not happy that he's not finding as much of an advantage as he would like.
Yeah, you're probably right, because I also look very disappointed during my games, but somehow it hasn't helped raise my level to 2800. The huffing
Uh,
and puffing on its own, not enough to become a master chess player.
yeah, I mean, he keeps shaking his head. I'm very curious to see what move he's going to go for. He's now down to 8 minutes and a bit. In this time control 20 plus 5, I think, by the way, round one confirmed that it is a 5 minute, 5 second increment per move. But still, 5 second increment, it's enough to not make you lose on time. But once, you're down to your last minute or so, it's not a huge increment either.
Yeah, Gary has spent more than 7 minutes now, more than 8 minutes. I think he spent more than 9 minutes on this
Hammer,
move.
I'm never the one who wants to say these things, but you're always so brutally honest in your assessment of other people's time management. Or would you say that this is disastrous time management?
Yeah, it's horrible. No, but like at anyone, you don't need to be any sort of chess expert. You
Uh,
just know that you started out with, let me go back. He started out with 16 minutes and 50 seconds, and now he has less. Okay, he has barely above 7. I mean, he spent more than half his time. Of course, that's too much. Like
yeah.
anyone can tell you, don't spend half your time. I guess technically, if you always spend half your time on each move, you'll be fine. But that's like the kind of quiz
I don't
you
know if it's
ask
just too late in
toddlers
Europe.
rather
I'm
than.
I'm struggling to wrap my head around that. If you always spend half your, I mean, you're
It's
not
the
going to be
same as.
fine at all. I mean, if in a classical game on move one you spend 1 hour, and on move two you spend half an hour, that doesn't sound fine at all to me.
I mean, it's fine as long as you really stick with the program.
If you're an
But
engine, maybe you always make the best moves.
yeah, precisely. But as I was saying, this is more kind of like what you tell toddlers or kind of like small kids. The same way we were so fascinated by the story of the payment for inventing chess.
The
Of course,
rice,
you're
the
familiar of the
rice
rice
coin. Yeah.
Yeah, every little chess kid has been
Not
told
just
this
every
story.
chess kid. I mean, we learned that at school, simply
Yeah.
in math class.
I feel
And
like spending half the time for each move is similar to that, like getting double the amount of corns per square on the chessboard. Um, because it sounds bad or it sounds good until a
I
certain
don't
point.
I don't know if I agree, but thankfully there's been some moves so we can swiftly move on.
Garry did trade in the center, the safer of the moves he had available. Hikaru
Mhm.
takes back with the knight, another trade is made, and Garry finally addressing the problem of the position, this bishop that we really didn't understand how could get into the game in a convincing manner. He moves the bishop one step forward, not really a massive improvement, to be fair. And Hikaru does the same thing. Hikaru, though, has the benefit of being able to move this bishop up and maybe even trade for the knight on the next move. And Garry saw fit to prevent that idea, moving the pawn one step forward on the side of the board, taking control of the g4 square, and thereby preventing Hikaru from trading off his still bad bishop. Hikaru instead tries to put his rook on the open file, the file in which there are no pawns to block the rook's path. And I would guess Garry then puts the rook there as well. No, Garry moves his bishop in towards the center. He doesn't want to trade off rooks just yet. And he's also maybe eyeing the potential of attacking this black rook on the right hand side.
Yeah, so I mean that rook would not want to step off the c file, but it might have to. I keep looking at the queen. So after bishop d6, you want to put the queen on b8?
I don't know. I guess both queens are bad. So as long as both queens are bad, it's not a big deal. Although queen b1 actually would threaten the pawn on the side of the board, just FYI. It's not the most complicated of threats, but it is something Hikaru would need to react to. I don't know. I feel like Hikaru is still very solid.
Yeah, and well, Hikaru is very solid. Also, the time situation. How bad do you feel it is for Garry?
It's really bad. I think Hikaru's gonna wanna, even though the position looks super equal, I feel like Hikaru's going to be optimistic here.
Mm-hmm.
He's just want to keep the game going and then try and win on time
Mm-hmm.
as Garry gets down to a minute. Well, I say win on time with that. It's more complicated than that. It's just creating a position where Garry can get difficult decisions while being low on time, thereby provoking him into making a mistake. Hikaru's not actually going to win on time, but he could maybe potentially win thanks to the time. Although here, Garry is advancing forward. So Gary's still not having given up uh, his hope of proving an objective advantage. Garry is the one pushing forward right now, trying to displace the Black Knight. And when this knight needs to move, then maybe Garry can move his knight up in the middle of the board.
Is there any drawback to playing b4? Are you worried about giving up control over the c4 square?
Um, yeah, a little bit. I guess it very much depends on whether Hikaru can successfully get there, and Garry wouldn't play this pawn push move. if he thought there was any chance of Hikaru somehow making his way
Mm-hmm.
to that c4 square.
My other question is b5 a positional threat right now? Do we want to stop that, or are we fine with allowing it?
I'm not sure b5 is really a positional threat because b5 would actually allow the knight to get an easier path
Mm-hmm.
to the c4 square. So in that regard, it would be advantageous for black if white pushed further forward. That being said, I am concerned about the square on e5. I think pushing the pawn forward to b5 in conjunction with then being
Mm-hmm.
able to move the knight up, it's not so much um, about this pawn making its way forward. It's about this pawn making way for the knight to become better in the center. Hikaru played queen b8. Garry quite quickly responded queen b3. Ooh, maybe that was his idea all along. Garry has now successfully managed to
Oh.
get his queen into the game in a much more convincing fashion than Hikaru, whose queen is still stuck on the edge.
I mean, how do we defend the pawn on? Okay, maybe the pawn isn't under attack because b4 would be hanging as well.
Yeah, so
But
black has some counter chances against white's pawn, but we cannot overestimate those counter
yeah.
chances because with the capture in the center, there will also be pressure down on the bishops.
A tricky position now. I mean, the engine seems to think it's quite close to equality. I find it quite unpleasant as black. We talk so often about isolated pawns. Here, both sides have isolated d pawns, but I feel like our pawn on b5 is somehow much more vulnerable.
Well, it's the one under attack,
Mm.
and we're not really in a position to attack the white pawn in a similar fashion, or rather, we already have attacked the white pawn, but it's safely defended by the knight, and we cannot kick the knight away because of this pawn Garry so cleverly played forward. Um, Hikaru goes for a bishop trade, and Garry then responds by moving his queen back. That's a big success for Hikaru, managing to somehow lure the queen away from the pressure in the center. I guess if Garry took in the center, Hikaru was planning to trade. Ooh, and then even though the white queen was pointing on black's bishop, the white knight could actually capture a white pawn and allow the knight to capture a white bishop thereafter. So very, very good tactics there from Hikaru, which forced Garry back on the defensive. And after the trade, this is eased the task for Hikaru because now also Hikaru can get his queen into the game.
Queen d6 right now. I guess there's nothing wrong with that move, targeting the pawn on b4, activating the queen.
It
Yeah,
seems
that's the
very
move.
logical.
Yeah, that is the move that Hikaru has gone for. And b5.
And here, pawn to b5 in a way is not the move white wants to make because it makes it easier for the black knight to make its way to the c4 square.
Mm-hmm.
However, after knight a5, the fact that white chased the black knight away has enabled the white knight to get into the center thereafter. And here it's actually a big problem for Hikaru that he's played this pawn to h6. Hikaru would really like to move this pawn back because he wants to play the move f6 to kick the knight out, but he can't really do that because it weakens one of the very big key squares around the black king. He really would have needed that other pawn to step backwards. So this creates a tricky situation for Hikaru. Of course, the knight is under attack. He has to move, but then the white knight comes up in the center. Wow, Hikaru is under pressure here. And Garry is actually kind of recouping from that time disadvantage he gave himself. Garry was down by, I feel like, 7 minutes at some point.
Yeah.
Now it's only 2 minutes between the players. And wow, look at this. Hikaru sacrifices a pawn. Knight to c4. The knight comes in, even though white has that square under control with no less than 3 pieces. And now after captures. Ooh, this is so clever. Hikaru gives away a pawn, but not for long. He is planning to sacrifice his rook against the white bishop. At this point, he's down. He has a bishop in trade for a rook and a pawn, but he's getting both of them back because first he's taking a pawn and then he's caught the 2 rooks on the same diagonal. So that was pretty clever. And that means Garry cannot recapture with the bishop after all of these trades. So the knight comes in, trades happen, but Garry captures not with the bishop because of that the trick we saw. Instead, he captures with the rook. And now, if the trade is made between the rooks, then the bishop remains on the board to protect the white pawn on b5. But Hikaru saw all of this and instead moves his rook over. Now he has the pressure against the b5 pawn, and he has the pressure against the d4 pawn. Hikaru's down a pawn, but it was a sacrifice. And he believes that he has good compensation and that white is not going to be able to utilize that extra pawn.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree with him. Of course, I would not be happy to play black here, but I think the bishop from d7, that is quite passive now. I was hoping maybe in the future I can bring it to e6, ideally with a tempo hitting the rook, and then to d5. I feel on d5 the bishop will be not only a very nice blockading piece, but it will also look down towards g2. So maybe Hikaru can at some point create some counter chances. So I think he has great chances to hold.
Yeah, but can he win? He's behind Garry in the tournament. Gary's very low on time. I don't know. I think Hikaru's still thinking about whether he can win this game. I think his compensation for the pawn is so good that he's not really thinking how to make a draw. He's thinking how to win.
But what would be the way? I mean, if you want to win,
let's not capture this pawn in the center. That's for sure. Garry Kasparov offers you a free pawn in the center. You be suspicious. The black queen capturing would be a big mistake, as then the bishop moves in to make a check on the side of the board. Yeah, the bishop is lost, but the fact that you've opened up between the queens means that white ends up winning a queen in that line. Instead, Hikaru takes a page out of Fiona's playbook, moving that bishop up to the d5 square, where it's both blocking the white pawn from advancing. The bishop is taking control of important squares, but also pointing down on the opposing king, and Kasparov moving his bishop back to give that king protection. That's a prudent choice under the circumstances.
Yeah, bishop f1, and now the ball is back in Hikaru's court. How do we continue making progress here? Can we dream? I mean, I'm dreaming of some kind of attack, but I don't see how I can make it happen.
Rook
You want to
e7
use
on
the
the board
e5?
from Hikaru.
Rook e7.
Queen c1, Garry 2 pieces on the open file. mean, is Hikaru gonna play something like G5? It gives more space to his king, and then maybe he can push these pawns forward to attack. Maybe I'm a bit hung up on Garry's time
Mhm.
management. I will
Yeah.
admit, I am wanting to punish the former world champion for only having 2 minutes left on the clock. But maybe the way to punish is not being super aggressive, but simply staying solid, which will frustrate Kasparov, given that he has the extra pawn. He's trying to find a way to win, but as long as Hikaru stays solid, this extra pawn is not going anywhere. And
Yeah.
that's why even though Hikaru's down a pawn, he's really not in trouble.
Chad seems very happy to see that Hikaru has achieved the legendary triple stack. So those pieces are looking nice and powerful on the d file, but we want them to do more ideally than just pick up that pawn, right? Because
Are you one of the people? So this triple stack back in the day of books instead of videos, this was called Alyekin's Cannon, named after the former world champion Alexander Alyekin. And back in the day, they always had the queen as the furthest back piece because you want to attack with like the lower value pieces first so that
yeah,
your queen comes up into to take down the leftovers in the battle.
I see
uh
Chadok is saying, I also thought it was a gun, not a
oh,
cannon. I thought it was Alechin's gun,
maybe it's
but
canon in Norwegian.
maybe different countries, yeah.
Yeah, my bad.
Probably one of those cases. But anyway, we see the Queen has decided no more of that discussion. Doesn't matter if it's a gun, a cannon, a triple stack. I'm out of here. And the Queen has gone to b4.
Still pointing towards the pawn in the center, very much the focus of Hikaru's pieces right now. Garry tries to do a double stack on the c file, but in response, Hikaru just opens up for his rook in the center. And now that white pawn is saying bye bye, and Garry Kasparov is down to just 30 seconds on the clock. I think I am vindicated for my comment about Hikaru trying to win this game. That is very much what is happening right now. With that latest move, rook to c8, the evaluation bar also now in Hikaru's favor. He's about to win back the pawn he was down, but he also has the more well-placed bishop as opposed to whites. And honestly, I forgot all about this being a chess 960 game because this is looking very normal at the moment. The queen comes in to capture in the center, a trade between the rooks, a trade between the queens. It's equal material right now, but look at the difference in the activity of the pieces. The black piece is much more centralized and also making an immediate threat on the white pawn. Kasparov moves that pawn forward. Hikaru takes aim at it, forcing the white rook to protect. Hikaru now bringing his king in. We know the king is important in the end games. Hikaru wants to bring it up the board. Garry then pawn to f3 opens up for bringing the king in as well. But look at this. He is putting all his pawns on the light squares. Despite both players having light squared bishops, the computer here feels that pawn to h5 with the idea pawn to h4 is very, very powerful for Hikaru because he can then lock the white pawns to the light squares, being unable to move forward without getting isolated pawns.
And could white
That
not react to h5 by somehow
well,
trying to stop us?
I guess white could try and play g3, but then the same idea comes
Yeah.
in with black trying to put the pawns on the dark squares and white kind of forced to put them on the light squares. That was a big opportunity for Hikaru. Unfortunately, he didn't see it. He continued pushing his king into the center, a very logical plan of which Kasparov also subscribes. Hikaru now tries to go for the pawns on the dark squares plan. Pawn to g5. The idea is to go pawn to h4 afterwards. And this looks good for Hikaru. Hikaru still has incredible pressure on on Kasparov's position, despite the reduced material on the board. Hikaru just has the way better placed pieces in every in every single way.
Do you feel it's enough though? Or do you think we will need some help from Garry, who I don't know what's going on. It is apparently his move. The clocks show 0.
I guess Garry played rook d3, preventing the king from coming up. But then Hikaru could do this pawn up on the side plan. Instead, Hikaru rook c4. So Hikaru wants to attack the white pawn on a3, but he wants to do it from somewhere where he can attack two things at once. So here, from his placement on a4, this rook was only attacking the pawn, but now Hikaru is trying to move the rook up so that it will both put pressure on the second rank as well as putting pressure on that edge pawn. Garry coming in with his king. Once again, Hikaru could push his pawn up the side of the board. He could also try and complete his maneuvering. Wow, Hikaru pushes pawn to f5, wants to kick the king. Garry plays pawn to g3, but that is controversial. That means that there's no longer kind of the defensive structure of the white pawns on the king side. And for the first time in this game, computer is saying that Hikaru has a winning position. Computer wanted pawn to f4, which in a way doesn't make sense, because when you're defending, you want to trade as many pawns as possible. And I guess that's why Hikaru avoided it. Instead, Hikaru pushing his rook up, attacking the bishop. The bishop moves out of the way. Hikaru can now win a pawn. So that's why Hikaru pushed the rook up. He saw that by pushing the rook into the corner thereafter, he will win a pawn on the edge of the board. But there is a concern that with the rook now having completely abandoned the opposite side of the board, Garry could start a counterattack there.
Yeah, and this is not a position we want to get, because suddenly material is getting traded. It feels like the defensive task is getting easier for white. So I think Hikaru is going to try and find a move which leads to more problems. Actually, that move was rook c2, and Garry...
Yeah, rook c2 put pressure on the bishop. Garry thought, oh, that's nice. Now I can put both my pawns on dark squares, which was a problem for me. The concern is that now you have to calculate a pawn endgame. Bishop up attacks the rook and attacks the bishop behind the rook. The only way the rook can escape and still save the bishop is going one step back. And then you have to calculate this endgame. First trade of pawns, then trade of rooks, then trade of bishops. The black king is way more active than its white counterpart. Hikaru is going for this endgame right now. This is going to be precisely what's happening on the board. And apparently this is a draw, but it's not obvious to me. The king comes up. Garry, king up from Hikaru. Hikaru is threatening the pawn, and Garry just ignores it. Wow. And the computer says Garry is right. Hikaru calculated that this pawn endgame would give him an extra pawn, and he takes the pawn, but now it's a race. The white king goes for the pawn on f5. The black king goes for the white pawn in return, There's no chance Garry calculated this all ahead of time. I guess he's just trusting his instincts. Computer confirms that Garry Kasparov instincts on a point. Hikaru pushes his pawn. Garry takes the black pawn. Oh, and now Gary's calculating with his hands. Is that old school style? Garry only had 2 moves there to make a draw, and he found the best one. What the? And Garry is both players getting a new queen. The white queen coming in with a check. Hikaru blocks with his king, and then Garry captures the pawn on the side of the board, and they both have a pawn and a queen left. They agree to a draw, or did Garry
Wow.
lose some time?
No, I think they agreed to draw. If Garry had lost some time, he would be long gone by now. What
You're
a
probably
save!
right.
What
You're
a
probably
save
right.
by Garry. I mean, super impressive. I think I agree with you. He didn't have enough time on the clock to figure it all out. He had to trust his instinct. You know what they say about class? Form is temporary, but class is permanent. And Garry showing his class there. That was really impressive. I really thought that he was gonna crack under the pressure, under the time pressure. Impressive hold. This game ends in a draw. It's really nice to see the two players still at the board discussing what happened. I'm sure they'll be back. Actually, we'll get the new position in 11 minutes. They'll probably
Yeah.
be analyzing together again.
Yeah, and we
Um,
actually got some inside information on that Garry yesterday had asked Hikaru if he would analyze the positions with him. They made an exception for the game where they were playing each other naturally. But yeah, Garry Kasparov wants Hikaru's input as the new chess 960 positions are announced. So these guys are discussing, well, everything that happened in this game. They're probably discussing the end game, and soon enough, they will also be discussing the next starting position.
Yeah, Ludwig, I'm starting to come around to what you said. Having black in chess 960 can be quite sneaky. Let's look at one game, and maybe one game is all we'll have time for because in 10 minutes the next positions will come out. Jeffery Xiong lost with the white pieces in only 13 moves to Wesley So.
Oh no, the white curse. I'm telling you, the white pieces in chess 960, it's scary. Because
Yeah.
you think your position can deal with more than what it really can. Let's take a look at it. Jeffery is Hikaru's opponent in the next round. So that's probably good for Hikaru that his next opponent got a bit of a
Beat down.
nightmare. Yeah. C4, C5. This is the same opening that Garry and Hikaru played. Knight f3, knight f6, still the same as Garry and Hikaru. Early castling. This is where Garry played pawn to b3. But castling doesn't seem all that bad.
Mhm.
Wesley moving the knight early. Oh my gosh, look at this. It's actually quite difficult for white to
Oh my
defend this pawn
God.
on e2. Is that a thing? b3.
It's
Okay, that's what Garry played, opening up for the queen. Wow, Wesley plays b5, sacrificing a pawn on the edge of the board. That pawn was captured, but then
here
the
it
knight came
comes.
in, and there is that threat against the e2 pawn, which is a bit awkward to protect against. The knight comes up. It was the only way to protect the pawn. Ooh, but then bishop e5. The bishop targets the queen, and the bishop cannot be captured because we've opened up for the queen in against the white king. And that was the point of this pawn sacrifice. Simply just opening up for the queen on the diagonal. So after bishop e5, this pressure is very annoying. The king tries to hide in the corner. Okay, I would maybe now capture. Oh no, we cannot capture to exploit that white cannot capture back because then the queen is lost in the corner. That doesn't work. Because actually after this capture, I forgot that our bishop was unprotected in the
Hanging out.
center. We needed that pressure on the diagonal with the queen. So d6, okay, opens up, but doesn't actually threaten anything. A4.
Actually, it does. It defended the bishop. Does that make a difference?
Oh yeah. No, actually, it does threaten something because, of course, this guy is pinned. The knight isn't actually protecting the pawn because the knight is pinned.
But after a4 it is, but it's now a difference that our bishop is defended, right? On
Yeah, so
e5.
now this pawn protects the bishop. Wesley does capture on e2. Still not clear to me how this is going to work because after you take, why can you not take the bishop? Sure, if black recaptures, then you still win the knight. So Wesley was probably planning to capture the rook. Oh my god, Wesley's getting out through this square and then this square. Oh, it turns out by some kind of a miracle, this knight lodged way deep into the opponent's half, actually barely makes it out alive. And then Wesley would be up actually a rook and a pawn in trade for a bishop.
By the way, Jan Ludwig, I think we need to get to the end of this game because
Yeah.
the next
Well,
positions are coming.
after
But it's
knight
a
takes e2.
fascinating
Yeah, no,
game.
after knight takes e2, it was pretty much just over, I think. Because yeah, no, this knight is just a monster. Look at how it's how it's just capturing every piece.
Unbelievable.
And the knight just returns because now it's equal on material, but it's just so much power pointed down on this. Oh my god! And the knight sacrifices itself, luring the king out. And Wesley just very calmly plays. Look at this bishop, Fiona. I'm just gonna say I called
Yeah,
it about this
it
bishop.
is.
It's a terrible bishop. But actually, for Wesley, it's the hero coming in very slowly to execute the attack on the king. Oh wow! And Jeffrey just resigns. He's up a piece, but the knight is coming in, and there's nothing he can do about it. The knight comes in, check on the king. The king has to leave the protection of the knight, and then it's just checkmate. Wow.
What a demolition job this was. What a way for Wesley to bounce back after his first round loss. Just for the viewers, quickly the results of round two: Levon Aronian beat Ray Robson. Garry against Hikaru, we saw that was a draw. Fabiano beat Lenier Dominguez, and Sevian against Shankland was a draw. So we are now going to go on a short break before the last round of the day, where Hikaru will be taking on Jeffery Xiong. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back with the last game of the day very soon. Hello and welcome back to what will be the third and final game of day one of the Champions Showdown Chess 960. Hikaru will be taking on Jeffery, Xiong, and Jon Ludwig. We have position. I was going to find the position number, but I lost it. Anyway, what do you make of this one? First
It's a
impressions.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So the first thing I think is important to note is that these pawns on the edge of the board, they're unprotected. It's actually not that common for any pawns to be unprotected on the first move. But not only are they unprotected, there's a queen pointing in their direction for each player. So that's presumably going to have some significance. Also, the knights are in the corner on both flanks. Very interesting as well, because since the bishops are in their traditional positions, we know that bishops like to be fianchettoed. But here, if you do fianchettos, then you're actively blocking your knight from getting into the game. So you need to find the right balance between getting your pieces out and not blocking your knights. With that in mind, what I'm thinking right now is maybe you go something like b4, because then you can both get your knight out and fianchetto your bishop.
I like it. I am absolutely shocked that you made the move 1b4 and immediately the engine says black is better.
Yeah, but there's problems here, right?
Yeah.
After b4, there's no longer any any pawn that can control the a4 square. So you could imagine something like knight to b6 being a problem, with the knight potentially being able to place itself on like a square where it can sit for most of the game. And here computer's saying c4, because even though you're giving up that pawn, you're opening up for your queen. And that's another thing to keep in mind. If the queen comes in to capture that side pawn, not only do you take a pawn, you're actually trapping the rook. This is game over. The rook is trapped. There's no way to defend it.
Yeah, I mean, that would be game over. So it's, as you say, it's not just a pawn. Let's rewind one move. What after c4? If we
Well,
got
I don't
something.
think knight b6 is a very serious move.
Yeah.
I think what you need to do is you need to start with knight g3. In that way, you're kind of protecting yourself against any threats here. And then if black copies, which I think is always the most logical way of playing, then maybe go for this b4 move. I don't know. Computer hates it. It's so easy to end up much worse on move 2, even though you have the white pieces. Can you imagine in normal chess being this much worse after
Yeah.
2 moves?
No, it's fine. But the thing is, it happens, and that's what's so interesting about Chess 960. It happens even to the best. I mean, we just saw Jeffery lose a game in 13 moves, but he's not the first and he is not the last. I mean, we've seen a lot of, shocking losses because, as we mentioned earlier, all these patterns that we know, a lot of it goes out the window. I mean, one moment of inattention and it's just too late. I'm also not sure, why is B4 so disliked by the computer?
Yeah, it's not entirely clear to me.
No,
What about g4? It doesn't really like the aggressive
no.
side pawn attacks.
Do you
Uh,
feel in general this position has more of a chance? I think the previous game was quite a slow game. We didn't see any fireworks. Do you think this has more potential to become more
Yeah, no,
explosive?
definitely. This is a very double-edged position because you can make those threats immediately. So here, for instance, c4 is quite a logical move, trying to control the center and also attacking the pawn. Knight g6, the logical response for black. And here, computer is suggesting h4, just trying to go h5 to dislodge the knight. And the only way for black to prevent that is by going h5 themselves. And then you can target that pawn. Black cannot capture because then the rook gets trapped. Like
Mhm.
this can get super complicated very, very early on.
Yeah, it's a very interesting position. I'm curious to see, are we going to see the knight come out? Is it going to be the c pawn? Can we go back one more time to the starting position?
The computer's top choice is playing c3 instead of going 2 steps forward, which I think is very weird. And then after knight g6, it wants to do this early attack on the side. And
Mm-hmm.
after h5 to stop white's pawn from proceeding further, then d4. And the difference between being aggressive with your pawn and being more cautious here is
Mm-hmm.
that now after pawn to c5, uh, black isn't really threatening to capture in the center because you can always recapture with your pawn. Whereas if you play this very same way with the pawn being more aggressive, pawn to c4, pawn to h4, and then pawn to d4, here black actually gets the advantage with pawn to c5. The
Mm-hmm.
pawn cannot be captured due to the rook being
The
trapped.
same tactic, yeah.
And so you have to prevent this idea, but then in the meantime, black is going to be able to force your rook into the open. And here, what is often the case is that you don't benefit from bringing your pieces out early because it leaves your pieces exposed for your opponent to attack them. Uh, moving on. So no, it's a very, very interesting starting position. And whenever there's undefended pawns at the beginning, um it's definitely more to white's favor.
Mm-hmm.
So in this position, this is one of those positions where white's advantage is probably higher than in a normal game of chess from the original starting position, which means it's very nice that Hikaru gets to have the white pieces in this luck of the draw.
I agree with you. I mean, I'm just looking at the camera there of the two Sams. They seem to, I mean, I can't quite all make it out. They seem to have gotten something quite normal. The king has castled king side. There is no action on the H file. The knight is on
So
G3.
I guess maybe this is a stupid question, but the players are not allowed to analyze with the computer.
It's funny you should say that because I was wondering how can they enforce that? Because surely they can't. So I guess
Well,
the
I guess
players
they can
have.
just keep the players in the room,
That's
right?
what I think they are doing because I
And they're
mean,
saying no
yeah,
computers allowed.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's kind of like when you say in a normal tournament, no computers allowed. I mean, you could technically figure out a way to get the computer moves, but then, there's a lawsuit and your reputation is ruined and, the whole saga that follows.
Yeah, I think also here, yes, there's the prize money, but what I think is happening is that the players are supervised by arbiters and cannot leave during those 15
Well,
minutes.
they're literally on camera. So I feel like we
Yeah.
have them pretty well under control.
Yeah, I just wonder what if a player says, I want to go use the bathroom. But okay, then they probably just check for electronics as usual, and that
Or
must be
they
that.
say no.
No, no bathroom break for you.
Only
We
bathroom
saw
breaks.
For a
after your game,
second,
which is fair, kind of.
we had Hikaru and Garry, but I was sidetracked by our bathroom conversation. But we have Levon and Fabi now, and their pawns on h4, h5.
Well, I actually noticed what Garry and Hikaru was doing, and let's just say the side pawns had been pushed forward on the side of the board,
Okay.
and White had even managed to capture this pawn. I'm not sure in what kind of circumstances it was, but they were definitely analyzing a position in which the white knight had been able to capture on the side. So it feels like, well, they're Nakamura and Kasparov. They're the main proponents of the dreaded King's Indian defense.
Yeah.
They are aggressive players, so naturally they were analyzing the most aggressive way to play for the white pieces.
Yeah, and we see the players now. We see Garry there sitting down for his game against Ray Robson. I think that's Hikaru in the back. I'm very curious actually to see the first game. We see the players keep signing those DGT sheets. I think that is indeed for the boards. What do you think Hikaru's first move is going to be?
I mean, I don't think a human can understand that pushing the pawn only one step forward is better than the other options.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think a human can understand that. And it makes a lot of sense making these threats down towards the undefended black pawn. So I guess c4 is going to be the move.
Okay. By the way, Chilimo is asking, this may be a dumb question, but is the normal starting position one of the 960? First of all, there are no dumb questions, or maybe they are, but this isn't one of them. I believe so, yes, that there are 960 possible positions, and the normal starting position is one of them.
And fun fact, I think during the 960 World Championship, they only play with 959 positions, which I think is outrageous. And I may have written some angry tweets about it. But yeah, they're not playing chess 960 in the chess 960 World Championship. They're actually playing chess 959 to remove the starting position.
Actually, wondering, Bishop is saying usually two positions are removed, the normal one and the one which is the king and queen are switched. So maybe they're even playing chess 958.
Okay, yeah,
Even more outrageous.
I'm not aware of that, but that makes no, that doesn't make sense because castling is different on those sites. I think normally maybe they only. It's a discussion for another time. Hikaru did open up for the queen against the undefended pawn. Jeffery has moved his knight out to block the queen's possibility of capturing the pawn. H4 is trying to move the pawn up to stop to dislodge the black knight. Here we thought maybe pawn to h5 would happen to block the pawn's advance, but instead Jeffery goes c5 because he also has this threat of moving the queen in to trap the rook in the corner. Hikaru defends against that threat. Now pushing the pawn up is going to be good, but that is blocked by Jeffery moving his pawn forward. And if this pawn is now captured, then the queen comes in to trap the rook.
So that pawn cannot be captured. Instead, Hikaru opts for the pawn push e3.
I guess he's just moving the bishop out to take.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, no?
Yeah, but it's also kind of impossible for Jeffery to prevent.
And what about mirroring it if he goes e6?
He moves the rook. to protect the pawn. Ooh, but actually, that's not the only reason he moves the rook. Now that the rook has moved, black also can capture the pawn on h4, since previously, if capturing this pawn, your rook was getting trapped.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
now that the rook has moved, you also enable the knight to capture on h4. Hikaru ignores that, just continues with his plan of bishop to e2. I guess now Jeffrey's going to have to take the pawn. And after taking the pawn, rook h1 attacks the knight. And if the knight comes in for the check, the king comes in and actually traps the knight. Hikaru is about to give Jeffrey his second 10 move loss in a row. The computer is loving the way Hikaru has played this, and the very simple threat against the h5 pawn, there's nothing really Jeffrey can do about it. He captures the pawn on h4 because he feels like, well, if Hikaru is going to take one of my pawns, I better take one of his. But now, since he was the first to capture, Hikaru can now actually benefit by not using his bishop after all, but instead using his rook, and
Mm-hmm.
then his bishop, and then he's threatening checkmate. And then if the knight tries to escape, then the queen comes in anyway to trap the piece in the corner. Wow.
You have me convinced, you Ludwig. It
No,
feels
but
like,
this was brilliant from Hikaru.
yeah.
I don't understand how he can kind of realize all of this in 15 minutes without a computer.
Well, him and Garry Kasparov's brains combined, I guess they can figure out a couple of things, a thing or two.
This is true.
Yeah, but very impressive. And it's almost like normal chess prep. Now that things have gone wrong for Jeffery, Hikaru starts thinking like, oh, this we hadn't, we hadn't considered this, so it must be bad, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. But it's very important that Hikaru tries to start the counterattack on the H file here. Because if he sticks to his original plan of capturing with the bishop on the pawn, look at this. If
Oh,
Hikaru plays the right
wow.
move, he's winning. If Hikaru plays the wrong move, the computer advocates sacrifice the rook for that bishop. When the white knight moves away, that means the queen can enter the fray, the queen attacking the rook. And if the rook gets protection from the white king, apparently this is just very good for black, because then you open up for your bishop to get into the game. This is such a crucial moment in the game. Already on move 5, if Hikaru chooses the wrong direction, he loses. If he finds the right move, he's probably gonna win.
The fact that he's thinking is great because he didn't rush to take the pawn that he can take on h5. And it also probably means that he recognizes this is already, even though it's only, as you said, move 5, it is a crucial moment. How difficult or easy do you think rook h1 is to spot?
I mean, for Hikaru, a player of Hikaru's caliber, I feel like it's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's gonna see this counter sacrifice with the rook giving itself up for the bishop, allowing the queen to come in. He's gonna sense this and he's gonna be like, no way I'm gonna allow my opponent to attack like this. And then he's gonna realize that after rook h1, this knight cannot capture the pawn. And if the knight steps back, well, then he has a pleasant choice of either rook or bishop. Hikaru doesn't go for either. Hikaru plays queen e4.
Okay, queen e4, a move that wasn't on our radar at all. Hitting the knight on h4.
Yeah, computer didn't like that. Now the knight can go back, but I guess after the knight goes back, Hikaru's planning to capture. Oh no, Hikaru blundered the trick! Hikaru captures the pawn on h5. Hikaru thought it was nice to make the black knight move back, because then when his bishop comes in, the bishop is going to make a threat towards the knight and towards the black king. But he missed this idea of the sacrifice. I thought he had that under control, but now Jeffery can sacrifice his rook temporarily and then have a double attack on the white knight and on the white rook. Oh no, but Hikaru's trying to trap Jeffery. I think Hikaru saw this. Hikaru saw this and he's planning knight to g3, because then after queen takes rook and king moves up, the queen is trapped.
Oh my God.
The queen has only one square to move to, and then the rook traps the queen in the corner. And then the reason this is losing for Hikaru is because the computer somehow is realizing some kind of way that black can force the white queen out of position. But is Jeffery gonna realize that?
So what is the refutation? I mean, why is it winning for black to take on h5?
Okay, so takes, queen up, knight back. Apparently here, pawn to d5, and then pawn to f5.
Oh my God. Okay, that's insane.
Is winning, because then you force the queen out of this square, and when the queen is forced out of this square, then you can capture the rook, because now you can capture the pawn afterwards and your queen escapes. I mean, there's no way he's going to see that.
That's insane.
And
Yeah,
the fact that Hikaru spent that much time thinking means that Jeffery is like, oh, you're trying to trap me. Initially Jeffrey's going to be like, okay, I can capture and then double attack, I win. But the fact that Hikaru spent so much time means that he's going to be like, you're up to something.
I'm with you. I think he will assume he's being baited.
Yeah.
And he's not gonna.
And he goes rook h6 instead. Wow.
What? That was insane.
What a trick from Hikaru.
Yeah.
And what a counter trick from the computer.
Okay, but that sequence with d5 and f5 is almost impossible to spot from afar, no?
Yeah, no, in a rapid game,
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
Unbelievable. Okay, so rook h6, and let's. Okay, what is this move by the computer to castle kingside? Never in a million years would I even
would you
consider.
castle when your opponent has an open file? Like, that's not gonna happen.
No, that seems so insane.
But what then? I think this bishop to e2, the computer's second choice, makes a lot of sense. Because after you move the bishop, you can then move your knight up next. But Hikaru's kind of fallen for that 960 trick, where he kind of got inspired to move his queen out early. And I feel like as the white player, when you move your pieces out early, you have this tendency of always regretting it, because it's going to help your opponent develop their pieces with a tempo in the long run.
Yeah, what do you think the idea was behind Queen e4? Was it just to bait
he just wanted to force the knight back. So he thought, well, if I take with the bishop now,
then there's no.
I'm not really threatening anything. And there's the trick, but regardless of the trick, you're not really threatening anything. So you wanted to move the queen up so that black actually had to take action protecting their own knight.
Yeah.
Which he did.
So
and now the computer wants castles.
Yeah, I think surely that's not gonna happen.
No, I mean, no chance. Well, something like f4 maybe? Nah. Well, then castles could make sense, right? Because you're trying to extend the scope.
It's
your
funny
rook.
because all of Black's pieces are kind of still on the back rank, except for the rook on h6 and the knight on g6. But on the other hand, there are so many holes in White's position.
Well, there isn't really though.
If I was White, I would try to quickly play b3, bishop b2, and castle queenside and get out of there.
But honestly, that's probably what Hikaru's gonna do. I mean, I feel like that's a very sensible plan. Uh-oh. Computer
Computer.
says if you do that, there's still the trick. But there's still the counter trick. And then the question becomes, now that they thought about it, how are they feeling about all of this mess?
But why is it not as strong anymore? Because d5.
Well, it is as strong. You just need to
Give
you
it
need
time.
to you need to attack the queen
No,
before
but
you
when you
take the
went down
rook.
the line, go down, queen g, like just continue. Queen g1,
Yeah,
king
but queen
e2.
g1 is a mistake. Queen g1 was a mistake
Yeah, yeah,
earlier
yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah,
Because you need to attack the
yeah,
queen
yeah, yeah.
first so
Because
that you're
even
able
here,
to first
basically,
take the rook and then take the pawn.
because even here, if you take on g1, okay, it's not as strong, but it's still, you get your queen out, right? Anyway, yeah, yeah, yeah. I was
I'm not
lost
sure
for.
you're getting the queen out. No. Well, apparently you can sacrifice your knight here, which is wild.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, so you're actually getting your queen out. Because if pawn takes, then the bishop comes in. Now that the queen no longer has this protection. Wow, no, this whole trick is just so insane.
Too much. Hey, Hikaru is spending a long time here. He is still in the
I wonder
tank.
if Hikaru realizes now that this trick is there and that there's a counter trick to his counter trick. How many times was this trick? Hikaru's trying to trick him because when Jeffery tries to make this double attack trick, then Hikaru has the counter trick of sacrificing the rook, but then Jeffery had the counter trick to the counter trick to the trick or to the counter.
You've lost
Yeah.
me. I don't know if chat can keep up, but it's a tricky. I mean, I think a lot of it boils down to, does Hikaru see it now? Does I don't know. Did he make a move?
Yeah, he played
E4.
d4, which makes a lot of sense. I don't know why we didn't think about that.
Yeah, great
Just
question.
takes complete control in the center, and if the trade, then you open up for the bishop to attack the rook. The problem here is that the computer hates it because the computer always realizes that in this kind of position where Hikaru is relying on this queen being trapped, the computer sees that pawn to d5 attacks the queen, and when that pawn is captured, here apparently knight to
But what I'm
f4 is
what I'm
good.
but what I'm getting at, if you go back a couple of moves here, if you allow, so after king e2, queen h2, rook h1, could Jeffrey maybe see that here d5 saves the queen? D5? No, but it's not the same idea. Yeah? It's not f5 here. Because my point is, could Jeffrey get to this position with queen h5 and realize, oh, I can save my queen this way, and then deduce that this is stronger earlier,
Yes, I mean, he could go for this and
Yeah.
then by accident realize he can do this when the position arises.
I mean,
Is that
it's
what you're saying?
unlikely. Yeah, that is what I'm
No, it's
saying.
fairly likely. I don't know. I think it's fairly likely because this pawn to d4 move is so good. Like this pawn to d4 move, it's like if black doesn't do anything real soon,
Mm.
it's just game over. Like Hikaru is just advancing in the center of the board. Black is getting rather desperate and needs to have some tricks, which is why now Jeffery might re-examine his evaluation of the sacrifice, even though he missed it on the first move. That was that was like 15 minutes ago. Okay, not really, but you know, when this bishop takes happened, right? They had a total of 34 minutes left on the clock. Fast forward to the current situation. D4. It's only one move each.
Yeah.
But in that one move each, it's already I'm doing math in my head, 11 minutes ago. In those 11 minutes, Jeffery could have easily realized something that he didn't initially understand about this very tricky rook takes bishop. Jeffery has captured in the center. And
Which
now
is
the
great
computer
news.
says castling is winning for Hikaru. This is wild.
No, it's not gonna happen.
No,
I
castling
don't.
is going to happen. Castling absolutely is going to happen. Like, castling 100%. I'm telling you, Hikaru's going to find it. Because now the situation has changed massively compared to earlier. Here, castles didn't make sense because of the threats, kind of potential threats along the H file. However, when you include d4 and pawn takes d4, now Hikaru's basically guaranteeing himself getting this bishop into the game, which will also make a threat against the black rook. The only thing he needs to be concerned about here is rook takes bishop. And so Hikaru's going to be very suspicious with Jeffery capturing in the center, because Hikaru's like, well, if I capture back with my pawn, I'm going to attack your rook. The only thing that could happen here is rook takes bishop. 100%, Jeffery's going to sacrifice his rook if Hikaru opens up for his bishop, threatening the black rook, which means Hikaru now knows that, okay, rook takes bishop is happening. And then Hikaru's going to realize, actually, it wasn't as good for me as I originally thought. And then he's going to see, well, if I castle, there's no more rook takes bishop, because then my king controls the square the queen wants to use. Oh man, sorry, I'm messing up the analysis board. Hikaru avoided taking, but he did not castle. He played rook h1.
Okay,
Is
rook h1. He's still better.
yeah.
I
No,
mean, I still
same
think
idea.
that because after castling, okay, if black also didn't have to take on h5.
Well, the thing is, now if black continues capturing, the bishop comes in, attacks the rook. If the rook moves back, we sacrifice our queen for a 12-move checkmate.
That would be nice. But there's this computer move d3, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah, instead of taking on e3 to just keep that dark squared bishop out of the game for now.
Yeah, but then Hikaru has castled, and then Hikaru still,
Yeah, but
getting that dark
I'm
square.
terrified of. I'm keep looking down at h2, but I guess there's nothing.
Nah, it's nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
I don't know if Hikaru realized castles was even a move. Probably he did. He just felt
Yeah, I
like
think so.
rook h1 was even better, because the same things apply here. If Jeffery captures in the center, Hikaru will recapture, attack the rook, and if the rook retreats, we sacrifice the queen for that very sweet checkmate.
Yeah, that would be a lovely way to end the game. That's not gonna happen, but very tough still for Jeffery to make a move after rook
Well,
h1.
Jeffery cannot allow this bishop to attack the rook. And the only way he can prevent that is pawn to d3. because
Mhm.
that's the only way he can prevent this white pawn from moving. Oh, wow. And look at what's being suggested by the computer. After d3, computer says bishop takes knight. Because the knight is protecting the rook. So we're not afraid of stuff on the open file. And when the black rook recaptures, then the white rook is getting into the attack. Did you play the spell chess on chess.com?
No.
Okay, because then you can jump over other pieces. This would be checkmate.
Interesting. But okay, this isn't checkmate, but it looks pretty damn scary for black anyway.
Even in normal chess or chess 960 or whatever you want to call it.
Chess 9 LX.
You know,
Chess
for those who
958.
enjoy the Roman numerals. Yeah, do that in Roman numerals, Fiona.
Chat actually
Chess,
did they did it earlier actually. I think it's
chess L V, no,
one
chess L
yeah?
I X,
What? No, there would be
L
no
I X.
no, but X stands for
You don't know
the
Roman
test.
numerals?
No, I do.
No, you don't. It's IX. IX is 9.
But I was saying 58.
Yeah.
But
So
then it's V111, no?
9LIX.
But IX is 9. I'm saying 958.
Yeah. L is 50.
Yeah, and 8 is V111.
Yeah, but
VIII.
no, but 58 it was nonsense. The it's not the same. You cannot switch around the okay, we missed this discussion, but like the position with the king on e1 and the king on d1 is completely different because of how the queenside castling works.
What?
the the starting position,
Yeah.
the same position as the normal chess position, but with the king and
I
queen.
trust Wandering Bishop,
Yeah,
you
but he's
know?
wrong. I mean, maybe you should learn not to
But
trust Twitch chatters.
do you know? No, but he's a
He's a
mod.
mod, and
You know,
mods cannot
Jeffery.
do anything wrong.
Mods can do no wrong. No, I think he knows. I trust.
No, he's wrong. He's wrong.
Are you 100% sure they only take one
No,
position out and not
I'm
two?
I'm I'm like I want to say like 78% sure.
I have no idea, but I'm sorry, Hammer. I trust Wandering Bishop over you.
Now, I'm pretty sure that because of how the castling rules move, like switching the king and queen makes for completely different starting positions.
Wandering Bishop says, I understand your argument that it shouldn't be excluded, but it is. You just have to take the L
Okay.
and move on.
Apparently, mods over commentators, huh? Okay,
Sorry,
we
Hammer.
gotta move. Jeffrey did play not
But
take.
you pushed me into a corner by saying I didn't know Roman numerals, so I had to hit back. You left me with no choice.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Okay, back to the
I
game.
but you were always trying to say
I was trying
958.
to spell 58, so I
Okay,
think we were
yeah,
like on different
fair enough.
wavelengths.
Take the extra L,
Yeah.
says Gnarls.
That's a good one, actually.
AKA 40. Just, not showing off or anything. But I'll take the 40. From
Okay,
now on, a
we're
big
even.
loss is just gonna be a 40. I'm making that happen. Pawn to f4. What is this game? So Hikaru could have captured this black pawn. Uh, he could have captured the knight and then invaded with the rook. I kind of thought that looked interesting,
Yeah.
even though I do understand Hikaru not wanting to disrespect the bishops like that. Um, I mean, I would be okay giving the opponent the bishop pair if it means we have a
Hmm.
rook just constantly putting pressure in towards the king. But I guess Hikaru, no, look at this. Like, okay, apparently there's some. Oh, apparently it's just checkmate. But imagine you don't go for the checkmate and you take some time to capture the pawn in the center, and then it's like then Jeffery would castle, and it's not actually an issue with the pressure from the rook.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, no, that makes it actually makes perfect sense why Hikaru wouldn't be so impressed having the rook there, because like the king could just
Yeah.
jump away. So instead, Hikaru's trying to reinforce his attack with pawn to f4.
You did call it hammer that this starting position had a lot of potential, and it sure doesn't disappoint. So F4, what's the
I
threat?
just don't understand this move whatsoever. There's nothing Hikaru can do on the next move that he couldn't do on the previous.
Okay, let's make A6 or whatever to... No,
I mean, he can go king
nothing.
f2. I guess that could be the point. That he's just trying to create some shelter for his king. But
But
like
why
he
wouldn't
can't.
he try to castle
Well, he
queenside
cannot move
instead?
further forward because then he's giving up his
No, but
knight.
I mean, if he's worried about his king, why would he play F4 rather than bishop D2 or B3 and try and castle?
I guess he feels like he doesn't have a lot of pawns over here.
Yeah.
So he wants to have the king closer to the like this army. But why wouldn't he just capture the pawn? Knight up, queen back. This is probably why. He wanted to avoid that the knight moves into the center and then the pawn kicks the bishop, and when the bishop moves back, there's just some
Hmm.
trades neutralizing white's initiative.
So you're saying F4 is basically just an ambitious move to try and keep playing. I mean, to avoid
I don't know
trades and to
about
avoid
ambitious. It's just a preventive move, right? It's
preventing
just,
trades.
well, no, it's preventing knight e5.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about what Hikaru can do, it's about what
Mm-hmm.
Jeffery now can't
And
do.
that's fair enough. So F4 was met by E6.
I guess now you can give a check, but that doesn't really matter. The king wants to go here anyway. Hikaru can capture in the center. Do you want to use your rook or your queen?
Um,
I guess you want to use your rook.
I was gonna say queen. I'm a bit worried to be hit by some B6, bishop B7.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. We could still capture the knight, and then after the recapture, we can get this rook up. Oh,
Mm.
no, we cannot. Oh, this knight is unprotected.
By the way, a big shout out to Medicine Alvaro, who just rated or hosted us with almost 1,000 viewers, which is huge. So thank you so much, Alvaro. Welcome everyone to what is the last day, the last
Last
round,
round
the
of the
last
first day.
round of the first day. I have to say I'm struggling, this position. I think I would struggle with it anyway, but with the time difference, I just keep staring at the board and like, what is going on here? Would you, okay, let me ask you a question. Would you play white here? Or do you think there's an argument to be made for preferring black?
Oh, there's definitely an argument to be made for preferring black. Oh, no doubt. Um, like this. I don't know. I guess it's kind of about this move b5, which I've
Mm-hmm.
seen the computer suggest quite a few times, and I really, really like it. So here Hikaru goes king f2. I guess that was one of those moves he had as a result of pushing the pawn up. One of the benefits now is that he's protecting the knight, which means he enables himself to go f5 next move without being afraid of the queen attacking. And b5 is being suggested by the computer. And then if this pawn is captured, you would start to see that black simply has more pawns in the center of the board than white. And you could potentially also, like you talked about, get the bishop out to attack on the diagonal. Instead, Jeffery has played d5, also very sensible, getting the rook into the game. Now, if Hikaru captures, the rook will recapture, and now if Hikaru wants to win back the pawn he's down, then he's going to have to acquiesce to further trades. Oh, and this is what's happening. So Hikaru did take on d5, and then he did take the pawn in the center.
We haven't
Material,
talked about it so much, but the player's also getting both of them quite low on time.
yeah, which is a direct result of
Hmm.
the incredibly complicated position we had early on.
So rook d3 and Jeffrey has just played knight b6. I think a logical move, developing that knight from the corner and protecting the rook on
Yeah,
b5.
classy move. I had this lesson with the chess club in Fredrikstad,
Mm-hmm.
a remote, well, not
I've
that.
played there
Oh, you
actually.
have?
Yeah,
Well,
in the Norwegian League a long
it's
time
a
ago.
little town in the southeast of Norway.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the point to them that trades is a very underappreciated part of chess. And here, black has a well-placed rook in the center of the board. But if you agree to the trade, then white remains with a well-placed piece in the center, while black has none. So by keeping the tension, and instead of making the trade, Jeffery comes in with another piece to protect. Now, if Hikaru is the one to make the trade, then the knight has miraculously gotten itself out of the corner and into the center of the board. And now it's not no longer only white having the good piece in the center, it's also black. So I really think trades, a somewhat undercommunicated part of chess. You often want to, very often, when you have a well placed piece, you want your opponent to be the one to make the trade so that you can replace your well placed piece with another well placed piece, which is what Jeffery went for here. Hikaru now makes a game losing blunder, according to the computer.
But why is it again
This
so bad?
is a mystery. Apparently, bishop to e7 is now winning for black, which
Bishop
is,
e7 makes a lot of sense because it covers d8. Because the first thing I was wondering, if we rewind one move, I was like, oh, the bishop on h5 is now very loose. But of course, that cannot be captured because there's a. Oh, it's actually not a mate. I
well,
thought there
it,
was a
it
mate.
can be captured, but I, the computer advises not to.
Okay, there is queen b4, and
Queen
that's
b4 is a problem,
what is
and then
this?
the knight comes in, but there's no checkmate. It's undoubtedly dangerous for the king, but it's not checkmate. It's winning for white though, so
Yeah.
he's not gonna take the bishop. But bishop to e7 is, I feel like, the most underwhelming winning move I've ever seen, because
Yeah,
you're not threatening anything, right? You're just defending. You're just, okay, we saw here that the white rooks are trying to get to the d8 square. Okay, we protect that square with our bishop, and then you're all of a sudden winning. Jeffrey has played this bishop move, but I mean, I'm sure he doesn't realize how good this position is for him. Because
So what's the problem? We are threatening to take on h5 now, but if the bishop just moves?
oh, the queen is trapped. The queen is trapped.
Oh
No.
my goodness.
Oh my gosh, the queen is just trapped in the middle of the board. How did that happen? Why wasn't the queen trapped on the previous move? If pawn to f5, then the queen steps back and the knight cannot attack the queen because the bishop is attacking the
Oh
king.
my goodness.
So the queen is not trapped until the bishop retreats. But the bishop needs to retreat because it's being pressured. And if the bishop just trades for the knight, black recaptures, and apparently this is winning despite black not even being a pawn up and the queen not being. I don't know.
I mean,
I
is
don't
this
think.
really so bad?
Apparently, it's a piece advantage for black, despite black not even being up a pawn. This is wild.
Can we go back to the live position? I'm really worried about Hikaru's time.
Hikaru captured the rook in the center. And yeah, Jeffrey didn't realize he was winning. Apparently here he could have taken back with a pawn and then up with the bishop and then gone for the, like, it was very long term the way the computer felt like black was winning. And like the thing about underwhelming winning moves is that you're not going to understand yourself how good your position is. Like Jeffrey played this move just to defend his king. It didn't occur to him that the white queen would be trapped, or like that the counterattack on white's king would be so devastating. So after taking in the center, he doesn't go for pawn takes, which would have threatened the queen and given black some time to continue the attack. Instead, he takes back with a knight, which is also a good move, but not as effective. Hikaru now retreats his bishop that had apparently gotten into some danger where it was, and Jeffrey tries to capture the bishop pair. Now, Jeffrey is better because he's about to get two bishops on an open board, a board where there's not so many pawns to block the bishop's path, but it could have been much worse. Oh, and Hikaru even escapes from losing his bishop. I'm not sure if that was so good necessarily. Now the black bishop is coming in to attack the queen and also down towards the white king. Ooh, but fortunately Hikaru gets his knight into the game quickly enough. Or is it quickly enough? The computer says bishop c6,
what
pointing
about
down on the queen.
Knight d4? There's maybe some knight
Knight d4
e3.
looks
Oh
very
my God.
good for Hikaru, but it's not. Ooh, and Jeffrey spots this. Jeffrey does go with his bishop to that c6 square, pointing down on the white queen. Hikaru's plan was presumably to attack the bishop, but then knight c3 is a double attack on the queen from two pieces, while also attacking, well, pretty much everything else in white's position. So that's why Hikaru needed to move the queen out of the way. Hikaru offers a queen trade with black's queen, and after the trade, Hikaru now has very bad pawns, which is why he's in big trouble, unfortunately.
Okay,
Yeah, no,
here's
this is just lost for Hikaru, unfortunately.
but okay, I mean the engine says black should play knight g6. Why is that move so much stronger than another move? If it's just a long term.
Well, it's not long term. It's
It's
just
just
winning a
picking up.
pawn.
There's no way.
But no, but it's actually much more difficult than I'm making it out to be. Number one, Hikaru is threatening knight to a5. Knight a5 is going to be a very nice move because it's going to eliminate stuff on the queen side. Also, I would think why was Jeffrey not afraid of this bishop being on the same diagonal as the rook? Okay, apparently the knight can just safely jump forward. I wouldn't have expected that to be so straightforward, but apparently it was. Hikaru knight h5, threatening the pawn. Pawn rook back protects. Hikaru goes with his knight out on the edge. At least now he's going to take black's bishop pair. Hikaru's going to be down a pawn. But he's going to take the bishop, and if now knight takes back, his bishop is going to be really good on this diagonal. Instead, Jeffrey takes back with a pawn, but now the black pawns on the queen side are not working together. Hikaru brings his knight in from the edge of the board. Yeah, Hikaru's down a pawn, but this is not as bad as the computer wants it to be. However, both players are down to less than a minute on the clock. So I guess right now it's just about keeping your nerves in check and playing good moves fast.
G5.
G5 forces the knight back. Hikaru asks for a trade. Trade is granted. The black rook up along the side of the board.
What is the way? I mean, I guess
Hikaru's
we
shaking
want...
his head. He moves his king up. Hikaru's down to just 13 seconds. Jeffery, 50 seconds. That's not a lot of time either.
I mean, it's also not easy as black. How do you make progress? I mean, what do you even want to target?
Hikaru now kicks the
Yeah.
knight away from its promising central square. Jeffery kicks the king back. Pawn up, king has to move. Hikaru steps back. But the knight also needing now to step back. Hikaru can win this position. I'm just saying it. Last time I said it, Fiona, I said it against Garry when
came very
Hikaru was
close.
down a pawn. And
Yeah.
Hikaru did end up winning that game.
No, he didn't, but he came very close.
Oh, he came so close that I thought he won it. Hikaru now using his two bishops and his rook, pointing towards the black bishop. The bishop gets away from it. But now Hikaru uses his bishop out on the side of the board. Hikaru captures the pawn he was down. Hikaru no longer down a pawn. He's looking okay right now. There is counter threats from the black rook and knight. So Hikaru felt that he had to give up his bishop pair for that strong black knight. They now have opposite colored bishops. It's very likely that this will end in a draw. But look at this, Fiona.
Yeah,
Hikaru is pushing his two pawns on the side against black's one.
Yeah, I mean, I would be worried as black. I'm always worried when I see some passed pawn running my way. But I guess his idea is now to go rook f4 and rook f2.
Definitely. Question then becomes, what can Hikaru do about it? Can Hikaru just run for glory? What happens if we just push these pawns up? Like, he's going to capture our pawn, but we're going to rush on the other side? No. They're going to agree to a draw. Yeah, Hikaru retreats his king. And when Jeffery tries to invade with his rook, Hikaru has to stop that by acquiescing to the rook trade. And after the rook trade, you cannot win the position. The game is agreed a draw because despite there being lots of pieces still on the board, both players know that when one bishop moves on the dark squares and the other bishop moves on the light squares, the fact that these bishops never can challenge each other, that just leads to a draw in pretty much every instance once there are no longer rooks left.
I think once again, Hikaru, he was under big pressure in this game. He was under pressure in game one. Game two, he was pressing Garry towards the end. three draws on day one. I'm not sure if we'll hear from Hikaru, but for now, let's go to the last remaining live game. Wesley So against Fabiano Caruana.
With the white pieces, Wesley is up a pawn. Difficult to make progress though, as the one pawn he has extra is this guy on its own on the far left side, and the black rook is perfectly positioned to both keep that pawn attacked, but also making sure that the pawn cannot advance. The only way for the pawn to advance is for the king to come over and help out. But then you need to be aware of counters as well. Look at this trap from Wesley So. Wesley So wants to provoke Fabiano Caruana to move his king up and attack the white knight. But then after pawn to f3, you cannot capture the white pawn because there's actually a checkmate. The rook working together with the knight and the pawn for that checkmate. Instead, Fabiano moves his king up into the center of the board. The knight comes in, check on the king. The king can then go and attack the rook. But then the knight will both protect the rook and check the king. And it's very likely that they will go back and forth here for the draw. And indeed, that is actually what happened.
That did happen. Okay, so maybe what we can do is check out Ray Robson against Garry Kasparov, because Garry Kasparov has racked up another win. He's on 2.5 out of 3.
With the black pieces.
With the black pieces, Ludwig, you're onto something.
Two wins with the black pieces in 2 attempts for Garry Kasparov today. The only one who could match his wit was Hikaru. A game Hikaru was very, very close to winning, but Kasparov managed to hold his own. Very surprising first move from Ray, not even trying to attack the undefended pawn on h7. The knight comes out from both players. Okay, symmetrical. I feel like symmetrical is very sensible in chess 960. Just do the same thing your opponent does. Pawn 1 step forward. 1 step forward. Ooh, h4. Okay, yeah, we've seen this idea before, wanting to push further up and attack the knight.
By the way, just wanted to say for anyone asking in chat, will there be an interview? We don't know yet, but we will let you know as soon as we know one way or another.
Garry pushes his pawn up to stop white's advance. Bishop up. Knight in. Ooh, look at this. The knight just getting in from the corner and pretty much in a, well, as crooked of an arrow as a chessboard can make. I mean, it looks pretty straight on this chessboard, but it's a straight knight's L. And the white bishop is just getting taken out. It's not going anywhere. And boom, knight, the bishop pair for Garry Kasparov. And even so, the computer actually prefers white. But Ray didn't like losing the bishop pair, so he makes sure to trade off one of the black bishops that had good long-term potential, allowing Garry to retake the initiative, pushing forward first in the center of the board. Ooh, but Ray counters that central control. Very interesting game so far. I would personally think white is better here because the bishop generally doesn't enjoy boards where there are so many pawns as there is here. There's 7 pawns for each player on the board, which means that the bishop very often gets restricted. However, Queen d7 was a great move by Kasparov, and after the trade, the king was able to make its way to the f5 square from where it would create tons of uncomfortable pressure on White's pawn. In order to avoid that, Ray pushed that pawn forward, but that led to the pawn landing in the under an attack from the Black Knight. Uh, Ooh, and the Black Knight isn't keeping the pressure on the pawn. Instead, it's maneuvering to the square e4, which is a square that the white pawns has advanced past, meaning that the knight cannot get kicked out by the white pawns should it arrive on the e4 square. But somehow the bishop needed to go there instead. Garry never got his knight up. Why is this so good for black?
Yeah.
Computers say, oh, wow, okay, never mind. He did get the knight up. He just took his time about it, gradually making sure that white had no counterplay. Notice how this bishop needed to go here first to prevent the white knight from getting into the center of the board. So first, the bishop had to block the knight's path, but then after a while, the bishop could move forward, then freeing up for the knight coming in afterwards.
Really nice technique by
And then the
Garry.
rook comes in to use the square. After me saying that, no, this was the square for the knight. No, the rook comes in. The rook invades along the second rank. And then the knight comes in. What a dominating display by black's pieces. And white is just completely... I mean, white cannot move anything. And Garry's just picking up one thing after the other. Ooh, and he finishes with a checkmating attack. H3, nice move. Oh, it's not a checkmating attack. If you take, you just lose a knight. And oh yeah. And because that pawn couldn't be captured, it does become a checkmating attack. The rook sacrifices itself, giving space for the knight to come in afterwards. And yeah, Garry wins with just a dominating display of superiorly placed pieces.
Yeah, and Garry ends that day with a vintage Garry game. That was a really a stunning game with a beautiful attacking finish. We will not have Hikaru today for an interview, but he will be recording a recap. That means we are going to wrap it up here in a second. We'll be back tomorrow for games 4, 5, and 6. Don't miss the first one because Hikaru will be playing none other than Fabiano Caruana in game 4. Then in game 5, he'll take on Sam Savian, and game 6, Sam Shankland. So that's the program for tomorrow. Caruana, Savian, Shankland. Today,
3 big games, as all of those players are on the top half of the standings.
Okay, so today, how would you wrap up the 3 draws that Hikaru? How would you recap the 3 draws that Hikaru
I
made?
think the first game was just bad. The game against Ray Robson, Hikaru was fortunate to get away with a draw. He landed in a bad position out of the opening and had to use his defensive prowess to come back. The second game against Kasparov was brilliant from Hikaru, just defending very, very well. And then as Kasparov got low on time, Hikaru just got an advantage into the end game and was very, very close to winning that. I mean, normally I would think, uh, with being so low on time, Kasparov went into a pawn endgame where he was going to lose a pawn by force, which is just incredibly brave. But it turns out Garry, I don't know if he calculated it, but he understood that even though he was losing a pawn in the pawn endgame, there was going to be a race where he was doing just fine. So that was a really, really exciting game, as was this last one against Sam Savian, which had
Against
positions where he...
Jeffery Xiong.
Oh, sorry, Jeffrey Xiong. And Hikaru was winning, Hikaru was losing, and we were perplexed. It was a really exciting opening position and a really exciting game. And I guess kind of a draw was a fair result since both players had such good chances during. So I think overall, 50% score is a fair reflection of Hikaru's play. And he's going to need to win some games to win this tournament. And then tomorrow is a good opportunity for that, with him facing the third placed Sam Sevian and also
Fabi and Shankland.
Fabian Shanklin, yeah, who's also on the same score as Hikaru right now.
Absolutely. Tomorrow, 3 new opportunities. Jon, Ludwig, and I will be back to take you through all the action. I will be back home, so you won't have to deal with this background and the suboptimal mic. I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much for watching us today. It's been a great pleasure to take you through day one. We'll be back tomorrow, same place, same time. Don't forget to check out Hikaru's YouTube channel later for today's recap, and we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, have a good one. Bye-bye.
When I see some of these moves that computer suggests after a game that I play, and I just go, wow, that is the beauty for me, because these are not moves that I would ever consider. And when I then see the move and then like I might make a couple of moves to try and understand why, that is the beauty to me. I feel like playing chess, and I feel like hoping. I feel like playing chess, and I feel like streaming. I'm just trying to play as well as I can, and I don't really worry. Like, if I lose a game, it's not the end-all be-all. I'm not naturally talented, but if I don't get something, I try to figure out, why don't I get it? What am I doing wrong? Over and over and over again.